So good morning, everybody. Very nice to see people in the room. Welcome to those of you who are online. And could I offer all of us a very good new year? I hope everyone achieves what we all wish to in this coming year. I'd just remind us all that the meeting is live streamed and a recording of the meeting will be on the YouTube channel. And members of the public, thank you very much for joining us. There are live subtitles and you can access them by clicking the screen. I think we probably all do know the etiquette by now, but could we please mute our mics if we're not speaking? When people introduce a subject, please assume that the papers have been read and point out the key matters that you wish to draw our attention to. We'll ask questions once the speaker has finished. We continue to try to avoid the use of acronyms, but I do notice quite a few have crept in again recently, and I can't understand them. So could we please try not to use acronyms? We don't think there's going to be any fire drill this morning. So if there is one, we should leave the room and vacate the building and gather in the car park. So for members of the public, any questions can be raised using the Q&A function. They will be asked at item 16 and our company secretary will ask the question on your behalf. I have apologies for absence from Carl Simpkins and his deputy is joining us instead. Ian, welcome. And also from Nina Cara. And then finally, apologies from Alid Jones, our associate non-exec director. Has anybody got any declaration of interest to declare? No? Okay, thank you for that. That brings us then to the minutes of the previous meetings held on the 7th of September and the minutes of the annual public meeting on the 21st of September. Are there any matters of accuracy anybody wishes to raise? Thank you. And then can we look at the matters arising in action log, which was sent out subsequent to the initial papers? Are there any questions? You've got an annotated log there. No, in that case, I suggest we close those matters proposed for closure. And that brings us to what I always think is a great start to this meeting, our board story. Kim, thank you very much. If you could introduce this item for me.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm really pleased to note that Adrian Quest is with us today for this presentation. Thank you, Adrian, who is one of our acute liaison nurses for learning and disabilities. Today we're looking at our story from the Learning Disability team, the Learning Disabilities Autism team, and the story is about the newly launched Going to Hospital booklets, which have been highly recognised both regionally and nationally. This film was created in honour of the UK Disability History Month, and the Learning Disability team, as you will see, are joined by Disability Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly with a group of young people to look at the booklets and the use of Makaton signage, which is now in our hospital setting. So if we can go to the presentation, please, Pete. And Adrian, welcome, and over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I was asked to come and present this video, which I successfully managed to avoid being in for once. We first launched our Going to Hospital books in 2021. I think it was about a year in the work. So lots of work sort of over the COVID period in partnership with Disability Cornwall and our colleagues in Cornwall, the Isles of Scilly, and also the Down Syndrome Society in Cornwall. Ostensibly, the first book was a book aimed at children, and it was aimed to help children and family members have some understanding of what was going to happen when they come into hospital, and to introduce them to some of the places, some of the rooms, some of the people that I might meet. We were quite happy to say it was far more successful than we anticipated. We were very lucky to be nominated and won the HSJ Patient Safety Awards in 2021. And on the back of that, we had conversations about wanting to do an adult version of the book, and this year managed to finish that book and have it released in time for Disability Awareness Month. Like I said, it's designed to empower and support people with learning disability and autism who come into hospital, and it can be used in many different ways. It can be used as a social story to give you an idea of what the hospital looks like. You know, we all love hospital. We spend our lives here, probably far too long, and we love it. But for lots of people, it might be the first time they've come in. So it just gives them the opportunity to have a look at some of those pictures and see what it might look like before they come into us. We linked Makaton into the book, so each picture for each area has a Makaton sign, and due to the work that Jane's been doing with the panel and board, who worked really closely to try and get Makaton signs into the hospital, all new buildings or new ventures in the hospital are going to have the signs combined with Makaton signs. So our lovely brand new scanning department and wards that have come through that have the Makaton signs linked in with the signs. So the video hopefully shows how this has come about and how the work is linked into, hopefully will be used throughout the rest of the hospital. So for our new building coming in a few years' time, we hope that those Makaton signs will be linked in. It just enables young people and adults who are aware of those signs to be more familiar walking around the environment.
At Julisk Hospital, the Learning Disability and Autism team have got 2 books out for patients. We've got the children's book and the adult book. In these books there are pictures of different areas of the hospital which we like to send to patients so they can use them to look at what they're doing when they come into hospital. At the back of the book there are also Makaton signs. These help patients and relatives and carers to look at the signs and navigate where they're going in the hospital. What we do is we send these books out to patients that are coming in. I've got a patient actually who would like 4 books because they've got friends who also have learning disabilities who are coming in for procedures.
Learning disability nurse.
So Makaton started in 1972 by a lady called Margaret Walker, and she was a speech and language therapist working in a residential home for adults who had learning difficulties and some degree of hearing impairment. And they'd never been shown British Sign Language before, and she just wondered if she said the words and used the signs, would that help their understanding and would it help their expressive language? And there's about 450 key concepts in the core vocabulary, and they basically looked at what the most high frequently used words were, and that's where the core vocab comes from. And it was a resounding success, and ever since it's just been growing and growing and growing.
Reception. Reception.
T-scan.
CT scan.
CT scan, yeah?
Waiting room.
It's so essential to have the Makaton signs and symbols because people are used to seeing the signs and it helps their understanding. The symbols are that visual representation, they're line drawings of the sign pictures, and they don't disappear. When you speak and when you sign, the words disappear and the signs disappear, whereas when you've got the symbols, they're there to look at like you would a book, like you would read. And it's essential for helping people. By having the book, you can look at the pictures before you go to hospital, you can familiarise yourself with the signs, with the symbols, so that going to hospital isn't quite such a scary experience.
CT. 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 arms up and front look like this. Lovely. Like that. And then when you get to about here, look. CT. Look. That's CT. Look. Sensory room. Sensory.
So on my piece of paper there, from the Going to Hospital book that was created for the children, some free resources were put together by Amanda Glennon, who's a Makaton tutor, and by the Cornwall Down Syndrome group and the Royal Cornwall Hospitals NHS Trust. And these are free resources, so you can reach these. You just have to set up a free account, and it's www.makaton.org, and you go to the free resources section, and the Going to Hospital, the paediatric book is on there, and so are the Going to Hospital healthcare cards. And these are perfect. They're in square pictures. You've got the symbols, but you've also got the signs. So whereas you can use the book and you can use it to read it, this you can cut out and you can laminate. So on one side you've got the signs, and then you've got the symbols on the other side. So you can make you can have a key fob with all the signs and symbols on that you can show people, and it's so useful, and it's got such fantastic vocabulary in there, things that you wouldn't necessarily find in the core vocabulary, but it's absolutely essential if you're going to go to hospital.
We are the only hospital that do these books, I believe, and we have won an award for this book in particular, and this is our latest book for the adult edition. These books have got a QR code on our team poster. In our team poster, it has all of our contact details, and we can help make reasonable adjustments for those patients that come in for any hospital appointments or through ED.
Young people who enthusiastically took part in the video, but a really important reminder of inclusivity, especially that's been incorporated into our new buildings, which is really important going forward. So Adrian is here as well to answer any questions. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed to Adrian and the whole team. That was a really heartwarming video to watch. And as I was watching it, I was thinking, you know, we should be being inclusive in these ways. Why would we not be? And so it's a real pleasure to see, and also a pleasure to hear about us being a sort of forerunner in all of this. So are there comments or questions from board members? Adam.
Adrian, thank you for the video and the resource. It looks fantastic. The question would be, how do we make sure that people out there that might find the booklet useful know that it exists?
And we're currently trying to get access to it so we can put it on our Facebook page. Because it's a sort of joint bit of work, we're just making sure we can get agreements that we're publishing. But I said we have it on our team posters around the hospital, and sadly we are probably some of the most visible people in hospital. But it's visible on QR codes on those posters. I'm pretty sure it's on our outward-facing web page on the website as well. and we're pretty good at spreading the word. And as a sort of a smallish county, we're a sort of a reasonably a tight knit group of people with learning disabilities and autism. So I think for us, it's, we spread the word locally, but it's making sure that people are aware when they come in that those resources are available. And for us, I think the learning disability bit we're pretty well known for, but the autism support is less known. So most of our work at the moment is making sure that people with autism are aware that we can offer support when they come in hospital as well.
For that, Adam, we also share with partners at the Safeguarding Board, and we're taking it to the Carers Board, so we're trying to get it out. But as Adrian says as well, we're just checking a few things about licensing and making sure that that's all in order, but it doesn't seem to be a problem. But of course that word, once, as you heard Kaylee saying, once one person had it, they needed 3 more for their friends. So we're doing our best to get it out there. We've also been asked to share it now, having won an award for the children's. We've been asked to share it more widely nationally. So we're not trying to keep our good practice to ourselves. We're trying to share it far and wide.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rob.
Thank you. Great video, great presentation. And the things that sprung to my mind as I was watching, listening to it was, is there more we can do with the booklet in our unplanned areas? So these mechanisms work really well generally for our planned admission areas, because people have the time to think, the time to provide the information. Can we challenge ourselves? How do our unplanned areas make best use of that? Because that's probably when our users are they're most anxious as well, so it could have the most positive access for them. And the other bit my mind jumped to is there something, Alison, that we could think about of how the booklet could potentially help us with some of our recruitment, thinking of our anchor organisation responsibilities, and whether that can help access a whole new layer of potential colleagues for us. So thank you.
Thanks, Robin. Adrian, do you have any thoughts on that?
So I know in terms of signage, we've done a lot of work around the new buildings. I think what we're really keen over time, and we always know there's cost involved, is to somehow sort of back engineer that and be able to include that in more places around the hospital, and include West Cornwall and St Michael's. In terms of the sort of availability, of staffing, I think one of the things that I've noticed over the last sort of year and a half, 2 years, is we're very open about the fact that we offer support to anyone with autism, and whether it's staff members sort of siblings or children, then we're always happy to be called for advice. So in terms of being able to use that, hopefully for people who might have an autism or learning disability who want to come and work with Trust, then could be great to be able to share that with them, to show them what we can offer and what support as an employer we can also offer as well.
Thank you very much. Alison, did you want to come in there? And then I've got Steve wanting to come in.
Yes, thank you. That's, to say, an excellent suggestion, and agree with what we're saying around us being open. I think there is an opportunity now with those booklets in place to do more. So probably link up with you after this board meeting today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alison. Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian, and Robin and Alison have touched on some of my questions, so I won't repeat them, but congratulations. What a fantastic programme of work and a great success. So thank you to you and Kaylee and the team. And particularly thank you to Finn, Ted and Liddy for starring in the video as well. It's really, really powerful. The question for me then builds on the 2 questions just been asked. Is there anything you'd like the board to be focused on so that we can support you in progressing this really important programme of work of awareness? Alison's picked out one question, and so has Robin, but is there anything else that you think should be a priority for us?
So I think for us, it's kind of looking at it from the other way, but I think we do. I think we're really proud in RCHT of the work that we do. We know that we have colleagues across the country who would love to have the opportunities that we have and the staffing levels that we have to offer the support that we do. But I think one of the things that doing the book has highlighted to us is that we sit down at the bottom of the country, and maybe we're not as good as advertising some of the work we do. And I think we can do a better job of getting out there and telling people that, that the service we provide is maybe better, sort of at a really good level compared to some parts of the country, and being able to share that good practice with other parts of the country, I think would be really helpful, because we know from when we started doing the books, we've had various trusts contacting us, asking us, how did we do it and what can we do? So I think just that support to maybe share the work we do. And we do some, we're very lucky with our colleagues that we do some amazing work across multidisciplinary teams to get people in for procedures and things. And we were talking about it the other day that we do this work and we're just not very good at letting everyone know what we do. And I think we just need to be better at sort of advertising the fact that some of the things we do are pretty good, we think.
Thank you.
I think some of the things we do are very good. Absolutely outstanding. I was just thinking while you were speaking, perhaps we could send your video out to all the other trusts in the country and say perhaps they'd like to have a look. Ian.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. Fantastic. So I'll just share briefly. My daughter's autistic, and she's used this service, and it's phenomenal on a personal level. So I just wanted to make sure that I shared that with you, Adrian, and colleagues. The other bit, we did have this story at Charitable Funds Committee. So these books were supported through charitable funds. And just to reiterate, Adrian, we said it in that meeting, but for the wider board to hear that if there's further opportunities around signage, etc., that charitable funds can support with both Alison and myself, we're really keen to receive any requests from the team.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ian. Anybody else want to comment? Well, Adrian, can I just thank you and the whole team? Like Ian, I've recently had experience of this amazing service myself with my son, and it really did feel as if the hospital was joined up with what people need, and that's hugely to be proud of. So I'd like to thank you for all the work you do, but also for today's presentation. It's very, very good. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you very much for listening, and always happy to share.
Thank you. You're very welcome to stay, Adrian, as I always say, but often people don't.
Sadly, I think my time might be taken elsewhere. But final thought from us is just that we often get contacted by our sort of partner agencies, and I know we've got the new build happening over the years, and I think there's some opportunities coming that would be really great to discuss with people who are involved to see if we can get there sort of, the starting point to bring some other sort of innovations in, if that's possible.
Just really briefly on that, I think this would be a fantastic thing to share with our integrated care board, which would encompass a whole range of partners. And I know we've got Laura in the room here. I might ask Laura to reach out to ICB, Adrian, if you don't mind, to see if we could share this video and this story, which could be the first step of that programme of work, if that's okay.
Good.
Yeah,
so please take that away with you. Offers of money and offers of sharing. Couldn't be better. Thanks very much. Okay, colleagues, that brings us on to the next item, my report. I don't have anything to add. It's there in front of you, other than to refer to both Carl Simpkins and Nina Kara, who are both now leaving our board after, in one case, very long service, and another shorter but excellent contributions to the board. We did have the opportunity to thank both of them more recently, but I just bring your attention to that part of my report. So I'm very happy to take any questions. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. And not a question, just a comment. I was very pleased to see the report on the Long Service Awards, and it appears in Steve's report too. I did go to the link in Steve's. What it doesn't do necessarily is identify those individuals, and there may be good reason for that. But if the individuals didn't object, I wonder in future years whether it's useful to actually just include the names and let the board recognise that excellent service over a long period of time.
I think that's a really good idea, Richard, with people's permission. Certainly it was a lovely event, and what was particularly nice was that a lot of people were meeting old colleagues whom they hadn't seen for some time. It was a lovely event. So yes, I'm sure we could take that forward with people's agreement. Any other thoughts, questions? No, in which case could we note the report and come on to our Chief Exec's report, Steve?
Thank you, Mary. Happy New Year in Cornish, and Happy New Year to everyone. Thank you. A lot of information in the report, so I won't go over what's already in the report, but there are a few things I'd like to draw out briefly, if that's okay. First one just builds on the comments you just made about Carl, our retiring Chief Finance Officer, and I'm sure all board members would want to express their thanks and appreciation to Carl for the work and the contribution he's given to Royal Cornwall Hospitals NHS Trust and to the wider health and care system over his tenure, predominantly in this role, but also in a system capacity as well. So we wish him very best wishes for the future. And then, as you see in the report, I'd just like to say a number of welcomes and congratulations. Ian Dean is here in his capacity as deputy, but as you see in the report, he's also been appointed as interim Chief Finance Officer. So congratulations on that role. That Ian will be taken up later on this month. And it's a pleasure to have you joining our board colleagues, Ian. So congratulations and welcome. You'll also see in the report, congratulations to Ella for the appointment substantively as Chief Performance Transformation and Partnerships Officer. So it's great to have you in our board. Of course, you've already been in the board in your previous interim role. So you're very, very welcome, Ella. If I can also note the appointment of Brian Johnson as Director of Estates and Bernie George as Interim Director of Nursing, and congratulations to both of those colleagues in the roles that they're taking on. So fantastic to have a number of new colleagues joining either our board or working very closely with our board over the coming months. Then I want to give a brief update on industrial action, if that's okay. Again, the report refers to industrial action, but we're now into the second day of the 6-day industrial action period now. And of course, that follows on from 3 days of industrial action just before Christmas. That period traditionally is a very challenging period for the NHS across the country in terms of operational pressures. And that's certainly the case here for us locally in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly at Royal Cornwall Hospitals NHS Trust. We have been able to cover the vast majority of the shifts which were potentially made vacant through junior doctor industrial action, and that's enabled us to minimise and mitigate the impact of industrial action as much as we possibly can, and thank you to all colleagues who've been very flexible in enabling us to do that. There has been some impact from industrial action on the elective programme, and there will be a small number of patients who've had their elective appointments or procedures cancelled. We've also had to not book into a number of appointments and cases knowing that industrial action was coming, so that's also had an impact around industrial action. Aside from the patient experience, there's also a financial and a performance implication associated with industrial action. So in either cancelling elective appointments or not booking to full capacity for elective appointments and lists, that has some potential implication on our elective recovery programme. And whilst we would need to conclude the industrial action and then take stock on the actual impact, if we look financially based on previous industrial action experience, we'd expect the industrial action financial impacts to be something over £1 million to the Trust's financial position. In previous industrial actions, the Department of Health and Social Care and the NHS England nationally have been able to provide some financial support for industrial action. Currently, we understand that no further financial support will be available. Whilst that may change in the future, that's our current understanding based on the latest NHS England national information. So that presents a financial risk to us as well as a performance risk in what is clearly a very challenging financial and operational year anyway. So that was the industrial action update. You'll see in the report I provide an update on a meeting with the Secretary of State which was held towards the end of last year. So I wanted to just give a brief update on that, but also give an update on the operational challenges and pressures that we face. So as the report said, a number of trusts were required to meet with the Secretary of State particularly predominantly around the challenges associated with long extended ambulance holds. We were one of those trusts as that set out in the report, and the Secretary was requiring assurance from chief executives that sufficient urgent action was being taken within the acute hospital and across the system to address those challenges. So our focus continues to absolutely be on making improvements to urgent emergency care performance, and particularly to use that to enable improvements in ambulance handover performance. We do, however, continue to face some pretty exceptional and extraordinary pressures. They have been really significant in the period just after Christmas into the new year, and they've continued yesterday and continued this morning. So patients using our services will be aware of and will see some of the implications of that. We have had days over the past week where we'll have been at times holding up to 20 ambulances, and some of those ambulance delays have been significant. As an organisation, we've taken every possible action to address and mitigate that, and for example, that's included temporarily using some capacity at St Michael's to enable post-operative trauma patients to be cared for at St Michael's Hospital, to release acute hospital bed capacity here as an additional extraordinary surge action to provide additional capacity. That's been enabled in a way which is not impacted on the elective orthopaedic recovery programme.
Okay, this is live.
Alison, I think your microphone's... Thank you. So that's we've done that in a way which hasn't impacted our elective orthopaedic recovery, but it's an example of the level of escalation which has been necessary. Alongside that, of course, we have been using surge space in our emergency department and surge space in our wards, which has included using all of our boarding spaces across appropriate ward areas, and has included patients in the emergency department at times being cared for in corridor spaces, which has all been risk assessed, but clearly that does have a significant impact on patient experience and places significant additional pressure on staff working across RCHT. Actions are being progressed at pace across the whole system, and we're aware of those, but they include, for example, 12,000 additional primary care appointments to try to reduce demand on minor injury units, urgent treatment centres, and other parts of the urgent and emergency care system. However, that set of action hasn't yet impacted on the number of patients who are waiting discharge from Royal Cornwall Hospital's NHS Trust. So we regularly have more than 100 patients who are waiting for discharge home with some form of community care, or waiting discharge into community hospital beds or into care home beds. And we continue to operate at a very high level of escalation, currently at open for our highest level of internal escalation. To an extent, those pressures are reflected across many hospitals in the southwest region. So this surge, particularly over the Christmas and New Year period, is certainly being felt and evidenced and seen, with similar implications across a number of other trusts across the southwest region. As a system, we have been escalated to a gold command level of response since the New Year period, and that's the mechanism as a health and care system we use to ensure that every part of the system is able to respond at the most rapid position and the most rapid opportunity. So that was the update from an urgent and emergency care perspective. Then just really briefly, if it's okay, since the board papers were issued, just got a further update around West Cornwall Hospital outpatients. We were delighted to receive final confirmation of £9 million of funding for our outpatient build at West Cornwall Hospital. So construction will start later this month, and we expect over the next 12 to 15 months that construction would progress. And we currently hope that that will complete in March next year, with our first patients using our new outpatient facility at West Cornwall Hospital in April next year, which is a really important development for everyone who relies on West Cornwall Hospital services, but also it's an important component of our broader longer-term elective recovery programme. So fantastic to see that as well. And then, as you'll see separately, there's an update around maternity national alerts around King and maternity information system. Just to update board that having undertaken a review, we can't see any evidence of any information storage issues for any Royal Cornwall hospitals, NHS Trust users of our services. We will report through QAC after a 3-month period following an ongoing review to identify if there are any issues. And of course, if there's anything which requires escalation in the meantime, we will escalate that immediately. But at this stage, we've not been able to find any evidence or indication of any issue or concern from a Royal Cornwall Hospital's perspective. But really happy to take any questions on any of that report.
Thank you very much, Steve. It is a long report, but I do find it very informative, and those extra pointers are helpful to us all. Would colleagues like to ask Steve any questions? Sarah, I think your hand is up. Sarah, you're muted.
So sorry. So thank you very much for a very thorough report and your update to us this morning. In welcoming our new colleagues, Ian and Ella, I'd also like to say how much I agree with you in your praise of Carl. I had the great privilege of working with Carl for over 10 years, both inside and outside the Trust, and have seen firsthand his personal commitment and contribution to securing record levels of investment into the Trust, particularly our new women's and children's programme. So really want to just echo what you said there. In terms of the overall picture you paint, clearly we remain a Trust under a huge amount of pressure, and you very clearly articulated the impact on patients, but clearly there must be a considerable impact on our staff. And noting other reports which show not surprising levels of sickness and absence, I'm just wondering if we could have an update on the system-wide piece of work that I know Alison is leading on ensuring that in our new people strategy that we are doing everything that we can to prevent the ill health of our staff. So thinking about improvements to our occupational health offering, I'm wondering if we could have an update on that, please.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll ask Alison to provide some information and context on that in a moment. The points are really important. And as an executive team, one of the things we try to do is to be out with our clinical teams and our support teams as much as we possibly can, so we can see those pressures, challenges and concerns firsthand, and provide whatever support is possible to staff in those challenged positions, and also to work really closely with those teams that you describe, so that we've got very strong clinical engagement in the mitigations, the actions, the escalation options that are available to us to manage in this environment. And supporting our staff going forward is a key priority for us. So Alison, perhaps if you give a brief update on that, but this might then be something that we would want to come back to our people committee in more detail.
Thanks, Steve.
Yes. So in addition to what Steve's outlined there, from a daily perspective, the teams work very closely with nursing colleagues with regards to safe staffing. Then in response to your question, Sarah, around the occupational health review, that draft report, which has been led by Bernie George, has now been circulated to senior colleagues, and the next place that it will go to is our executive leadership team meeting before going to People and Culture Committee. That will call for us to examine our present structure and resources, and where we put our attention in terms of those resources, and how we might do things differently in the future. So it's looking at where we spend our money, how we utilise, and how we also train the staff that then support the overall staff in terms of well-being. And we can see from our IPR that stress is still one of the areas that is, the highest of concern and anxiety for staff, and potential burnout. So building resilience either through the actions that we do within the trust from managers and from our occupational health and wellbeing team, or through other things such as the Charitable Funds Committee and the funds that we offer through that, that you chair, Sarah, in terms of providing support for staff is really important. So that's work that we'll be shortly doing in this next quarter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah, for your comments and question. Robin.
Thank you. Just go back to Steve's comment on the industrial action. I think it's an opportunity for us to thank our teams for a really well structured planning session for the industrial action. We were able to see at a glance where we had gaps and who we needed to talk to be able to close those gaps. And through that planning process, we're able to be assured each day that our plans are in place and are working as we plan for them to work. So, and it's taken, I couldn't name check the number of people that have been part of that, but thank you to them all for the great work that they've done.
Absolutely, Robin. Thank you. Richard.
Yes, thank you. And echo Sarah's comments on the back of Steve's about those new members of the board joining us. Very much welcome, but also in those departing members, and particularly Carl in this instance for the work that he's done over such an extended period. I guess perhaps linked to that is just to welcome the news that you updated on today, Steve, around the £9 million funding going into West Cornwall. And just to recognise from a Finance and Performance Committee perspective, we've seen that scheme moving backwards and forwards across funding schemes, across different iterations of business plans. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank the team that have led us to that position now, for both their diligence but also their resilience in making that happen. The question really was just, can you just confirm what you said again, Steve, around the no more funding for industrial action, and just the definitive nature of that, and whether there's anything as a board we could do to make any representation towards that?
Yeah, very happy to do that, and also Ian might want to add to that. It's my understanding that NHS England have currently indicated no funding is available, no further funding is available to fund the financial impacts, whether they be direct costs or lost income, revenue impacts of industrial action. If we look at the previous two allocations which were made based on the length of previous industrial action and applied those models going forward, there would be a direct cost implication potentially of about £1 million, and there would be a lost revenue implication of £600,000 to £700,000. So we'd be talking of somewhere between 1 and 1.7 million. That's an approximation. We would need to conclude the industrial action and then, as we've done previously, assess and quantify the direct costs and the lost revenue costs. So that's the scale of the potential financial impact. I might just ask Ian if there's anything further to add in terms of any further information from NHS England around the industrial action impact.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. Thank you. So just to remind colleagues, when we submitted the H2 update plan that went through extraordinary board back in November, that was specifically, the guidance was specific not to assume industrial action beyond November at that point. Obviously, we've got the industrial action that's ongoing at the moment. At the moment, the update was an informal brief, but it was from the regional team, that it's looking that that's going to be the national position in terms of funding for industrial action. We continue to make representations, as it's relatively new news this week, in terms of the impact of that. And as a system, once we've got our month 9 positions, so the December reported position, early next week, we'll be in a position at a system level to understand how achievable or not that is, and a more accurate assessment of the impact that Steve's outlined there in terms of the cost and lost income.
Thank you very much. Isabel, perhaps be the last speaker here.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Steve, for a very comprehensive report as ever. I wanted to just ask a question relating to your item 2 in your report about the publication of the NHS England statement on information on health inequalities. And it was just to seek some reassurance rather than assurance at this point that our processes around our committee structures and governance will pick up the data coming from the health inequalities work that we're going to have to undertake and feed into our committees so that we can have that data and information available to us when we're making decisions at committee and board level.
That's a really important question, and it's a process that we're working through at the moment. As you'll see, some of the requirements take effect from the end of March this year. So we're in a number of areas working towards that timeline. And I think separately from an ICB Integrated Care Board perspective, that there's also consideration about any changes and refinements that need to be made. I might ask Lindsay if there's anything you'd want to add from a committee perspective.
From a committee's perspective, we'll consider and amend our work plans, and I'll work with Alison to make sure that we've captured everything that we need to going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues, very much. And you will see from today's set of papers quite a lot of mention of equality, diversity and inclusion. And I think it's worth noting on Steve's report, he points out the need for each board member to have an objective around this area and to have our appraisals based on that. So I think that's a really good move, and other points in the papers, you'll see that. Thank you, Steve, very much for your report. I'm going to ask the board, please, to receive and note that report. And then if I could come to Ella on item 8, our trust strategy 1-year review.
Thank you. So the purpose of this paper is to review progress against the first year of our 10-year strategy, which was approved back in November 2022. And it's also to propose to Trust Board today a set of priorities for year 2 going forward. It's important, I think, for everyone to understand this has been reviewed at our exec leadership team and at committees of the board prior to coming here, but we do want to make sure that ultimately those priorities are set by Trust Board, hence the kind of two-way dialogue, I suppose, between committees and board that we're trying to generate through this paper. Section 3.1 outlines our key achievements to date. I won't go through those in detail, but they are there for people to note, and I think we'll all know how many and how I suppose full that section is, which is really great to see. We have, however, reflected on that first year and the learning from that as we look to set year 2 priorities. And what we've reflected on really is that potentially we've gone to a place where there are too many priorities. We're trying to do too much. And whilst all of those things are really good things, they are things that in some cases, not all, are being managed as kind of business as usual in the trust. And what we want to make sure the strategic priorities do is really raise up a level to say, what are the key things that are going to deliver a step change for us and move us towards that level of that vision of outstanding care for all. So it's through that lens that I'd like us all to look at year 2 priorities and ask if that's going to do that for us. As I say, we looked back over the last year and we said, yeah, we do think most of the deliverables on track. There are a few where we've not been able to identify specific owners, and we're going to make sure we do that, because if they are owned by too many people, we know the progress may be limited. And as I say, for year 2, we are therefore proposing to focus on fewer, more strategic priorities. They are outlined in section 3.3 of this paper. Which is really where I think we need to focus our attention today. And what we've tried to do for each of those is to state clearly what the priority is and then link it to an outcome objective. For some, in particular 7 and 8, they are not yet specific enough, and that is because we are developing plans, or in some cases we refer to, for example, deliver the milestones of the Women's and Children's Hospital. Well, they are really clearly articulated in the Women's and Children's Programme Plan, so there's no need for me to reiterate them here, but it's important as a board at strategic level, we will check back to make sure we're delivering all of those milestones. So I just wanted to clarify why, as you go down the list, they become less specific in the outcomes, but that is something we discussed at committees and is intentional at this stage. So for next steps, really is to discuss here and to hopefully either amend and agree. Once we have those priorities confirmed by Trust Board, we will be using them, we being a kind of a strategic planning team, to have conversations with our exec directors and the care groups to do their more detailed planning going forward. So they really will inform the direction of travel for the organisation and make sure that we're really aligned under the same priorities going forward. So I'll pause there, and I'd really welcome feedback and thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ella. It's a really good paper, really clear, and I completely endorse what you're saying about having fewer, more strategic. But I perhaps also endorse the point about ensuring actions have owners, so that we can hold people to account. And not just that, but make sure people don't have too many actions. It's that sort of balance, isn't it, between being able to hold people to account for things happening. But I'm very struck by the value of that. So thank you for the paper. Richard at the moment, go ahead.
Thank you, Ella. And as you said, this has been well rehearsed through Finance Performance Committee and other committees too. I think the piece that would be helpful for the board in future iterations is, and we've discussed this, but it's that sense of what our vision might be, and it's the link of the strategy to the vision. So having a clear understanding of what we're trying to achieve in the next 5 to 10 years and what healthcare will look like through ourselves, but also within the system. It might help us to get that golden thread between the very specifics that will be happening in year 2 and things that move that strategy on in the vision piece. So, for example, if one of our visions is that we will be delivering care closer to home, the right place, the right time, for the right with the right personnel, do these objectives and do these strategic objectives for next year help us get closer to that vision or not? And I think it's something that articulates that within this document in future iterations would be really helpful.
Okay, yeah, it's really helpful feedback, and we discussed, didn't we, as well at Finance Performance, and I think it came through at Quack as well, that we, as a next step out of this, will also look to do a version which is for communication with partners, patients, staff, which hopefully will paint that picture as you described. By the way, you've just described it to me there, is really helpful, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Ella, Kim.
You. Ella, really great to see the patient leader with the patient voice and carer voice now encompassed. I think the only thought I've just had, having just had our presentation, is how we use some of our teams for inclusivity, so we can reach out to others to make sure we've got, especially discussing our health inequalities, inclusivity, how we can drive those to make sure that we're aligned there would be brilliant. Happy to team up with you.
That would be great. I'll look to add something in around that. Thank you.
You, Kim. Steve.
Really important report, and thank you, Ella. Certainly welcome it. And just reflecting on Richard's comments about how we can develop it even further and have that golden thread connection from next year to the overall strategy. I think that's a really important question for us, and we've done some really good work on developing that 5 to 10 year roadmap. So I think we can progress that. One of the things, and you mentioned it in terms of potential for further detail around items 7 and 8, is what level of detail we identify targets. And I think the Women and Children's Hospital and our EPR programme have been particular areas where we've considered to what level do we identify them specifically. And there is a consideration for us as a board, I think, given the scale of the Women and Children's Hospital, and it's clearly in there already, but whether there is a key operational objective around commencing construction work for the Women and Children's Hospital, which would currently be scheduled for Q4 of 24-25. And also that would be the same time we'd be going live for EPR, the Digital Electronic Patient Record. And just given the scale of those two projects, Women and Children's Hospital being the largest capital investment ever in a health in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, and given the impact that Digital Electronic Patient Record has, it is one of the areas we kind of talk through as to whether they should be key kind of objectives that we identify, and it might be useful just to get some views from board members. I know it's been discussed in committee. I know we've considered it from an executive and executive leadership perspective, but it's one of those areas where we could describe those things explicitly as key objectives.
Before I bring Alistair in, does anybody want to comment on that specific point? Ella, did you?
Only that I'd say I think I would really support and welcome that, being specific on those two big projects. I think it would be helpful. I think as a board we should be cited on those go live dates and be saying their key strategic priorities for this year.
Kelvin, are you on that particular point?
Yeah, just to say, obviously, whilst it is referenced, I agree with the point that actually, we've got plenty of specific information that could be added around things like go live dates and the scale of the work.
Thank you very much. Richard, were you back on that?
It is, yeah, I fully agree. Endorse. I think in both of those cited examples, the Women with Children's and the digital records, they are really key fundamental milestones in our digital transformation, in our physical transformation, in our models of care transformation. That's what I mean about that golden thread. So really pulling that out to say, actually, these are necessary antecedents to achieve our strategy is a really important thing. So absolutely welcome that.
And I think also on those two, to be clear that this is for the whole of Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly and the whole system. So I do hear people talking about you've been given all that money for your new hospital. Well, it's our hospital, and I think perhaps it would be nice just to make that point. Alistair, thank you for your patience.
No, it's okay. I think I'm going to make a very similar point. I think if you look at our electronic care record coming, if you look at our Women's and Children's Hospital, if you look at the health inequalities paper that came to board last time, all of these things are, one of the ultimate aims is to reduce health inequalities. And from my point of view, the health inequalities is the golden thread that runs through all of this. The Women's and Children's Hospital is a really good example of us as an anchor institution, keeping the Cornish pound in Cornwall, reducing poverty, getting people into work, the work that we've done through workforce, the Department of Work and Pensions, all those things that we've done that are linked to our strategy all drive down health inequalities. Even the work that we've heard this morning about learning disability and autism all reduces health inequalities. And it's just the question is, I know we've got it in our triple aim, but actually could it be more explicitly through our strategy that the ultimate aim is to reduce health inequalities and improve the health and well-being of our population?
Thanks, Alistair. So I think there's quite a bit of feedback there.
Yeah, really helpful. Thank
Ella,
you.
that I think will take us forward, and it does broadly go around the point you made, Richard, at the outset, around let's get that vision up there so we can show how these things link through to it. And I think in particular for thinking about what we publish and how we inform our public. We can still do better about how we inform our public, and be very nice to think just in a way building on what we just heard about learning disability and autism. We could give everybody a leaflet, couldn't we? This is what we're doing and this is how we're doing it. I know we do it in the annual report and so on, but something perhaps a little bit more accessible could be useful for all of us. So yeah,
okay,
thank you. Ian.
Well, I think when we're communicating to staff in particular, based on the comment earlier about staff health and well-being, is some of those targets are ambitious, rightly so. And as a board, I'd expect us to be setting ambitious strategic targets like that, but that can probably feel quite a long way away from the operational reality that our staff feel on a day-to-day basis. So I think there's something about how we describe that. So where we've got to take an example of 52-week waits for electives care by March 25, how we expect to get to that point, and how we just think about the communication of that with our teams. Yeah.
Thank you, Ian. That's helpful. So if there aren't any more, could we, while we note the achievements from the strategy year one, let's also say well done to you and your team, but also to everybody for the work that's gone into that, because we are in unprecedented operational times, and to go on achieving what we said we were going to achieve is remarkably good. So we'd like to note the achievements and then approve the proposals for year 2 with those additions that we've discussed. If we could add that to the approval, yeah, that would be great. Thank you very much indeed. Then looking to our item 9, our committee assurance reports. And if I could just remind board members that committee chairs are going to summarise the assurance sought at their meetings, and therefore directors don't need to add anything that isn't new or specifically wanting to bring to our attention, because there has been very good discussions at the committees. And as I've said before, our committees are there to do the work of the board, and they do, and it's an opportunity for a bit more of a deep dive into things, a bit more or less formal conversation. So I'm very much aware, probably in the last 6 months, how much of our board work is being carried by our various committees, and I'm very grateful to you all for that. And chairs do play a big part in that. And we actually do now have a committee chairs meeting on a regular basis to discuss anything that is of concern. So having said all that, and set you up very nicely, Isabel, if you would like to offer your report on the Quality Assurance Committee, please.
Thank you very much, Mary. You'll see that it's a fairly lengthy report, so I certainly don't intend to go through it in any detail. And as you'll see under item 9, there are other items around the quality agenda, which others will speak to. But in summary, the report that has been brought to board today really summarises the meetings that have taken place in November and December for the Quality Assurance Committee, or QAC, as we know it and describe it. And I think the first thing to say is that we actually have 2 meetings. We have what we call a Part 2 Quality Assurance Committee meeting, which is bringing together the Royal Cornwall Hospitals Committee to meet alongside our colleagues from CFT, Community Trust. And so we have a meeting that aligns our thinking around quality in that meeting. And we are in the process of developing further thoughts around how we extend that collaboration over the coming months. There were 3 recommendations for the board to receive or approve. There weren't any immediate issues to escalate, and I think that does perhaps reflect the detail that we do go into and the work that we do at the Quality Assurance Committee. And I think, as Mary's already hinted, quality is just a massive, massive agenda reflected in the paper that you have before you. I would perhaps just like to highlight a couple of items from both our Part 2 meeting and then also our own quality meeting. And I think probably to start off with in the Part 2, which is our collaboration with CFT, is that we have received full assurance of the integrated safeguarding work, but we note that there's been a 14% increase in that workload. And there's a development of a business plan underway to really try and support the development of 7-day service, which I think is, we would all recognise is needed. Thanks to the integrated safeguarding team and for the work that they're doing, but there's certainly more to do. I think we also worked on a broad range of quality priority areas across the 2 organisations during this time, and our intention going forward is to develop a new set of shared priorities as we move closer together as a system and as we move closer together in collaboration with our community partners. One of the things that actually drives a lot of the thinking and discussion around quality at the moment is about the impact both of the operational pressures that we're facing as an organisation, but also in relation to the massive transformation work that's taking place. And it's really important that we don't lose sight of the quality impact of any changes that we're either planning to make or are in the process of making. So we have a series of quality impact assessments that are now being undertaken to make sure that actually what we're trying to do is ensure no harm to patients through the changes that we're planning to make. So in relation to that, we're working very closely with our executive colleagues who are leading all the work around the Winter Plan. We as committees will be very keen to make sure that we can assure the quality and safety of the work that's taking place there. I think the other thing finally on the part 2 is really just to say that we received the biannual infection prevention and control report, which again is a very important piece of work that is undertaken. For those of us that have either been subject to a recent infection or illness, I'm sure we'll all appreciate just how important that work is. And thanks again to Kim and the team and everybody else involved in that work. So turning to our own quality committee, some of the items, as I've said, are already covered under our agenda today, so I won't mention those. But I think it's important to say that where we've been unable to really feel confident in saying we have full assurance, the areas that we're really struggling with are all in relation to the very well known and rehearsed operational pressures that the organisation is facing. So we have some areas of partial assurance. We're waiting for a standard operating procedure for the management of dermatitis, which has been a fairly lengthy ongoing discussion item at our committee over several months, but we can see an end in sight to that one, which is good news. The IPR obviously is flagging some deterioration in metrics in November, and I think that sort of occupied our conversation probably in our December meeting because we didn't have an up-to-date position to discuss. But I think the other area of partial assurance, which again is very well known, is around orthopaedics as being probably one of our key operational pressure areas. I'm sure Robin would probably be saying more about that in due course. But I think it's important to note that as a committee, we really sought assurance around the harm that might be affecting patients waiting for orthopaedic procedures. And the work that's been done indicates a lack of moderate harm. So that's quite encouraging that whatever is happening within that pressured environment, we are taking huge care to make sure that we're not harming our patients. And I think finally, just to say that we've discussed getting assurance around the quality and safety aspects of our virtual wards, because I think that, again, that's part of our future solution, hopefully, to some of the operational pressures we're facing. So we're trying to make sure that we can assure the quality and safety of that work. And I think I'll pause at that point, and I'm very happy to take any questions on the report, other than the items that are going to follow.
Thank you very much, Isabel. That's a really helpful description of the work your committee does. I'm happy to take any questions. I've got Kim and Ian. Is yours a legacy hand? It is. Kim.
More of a comment than a question, just to reiterate that, you know, as Isabel has said, a lot of work went in. So noting the high number of partial assurances, that's where the majority of our conversation went, and especially as well, we discussed the ambulance hold position as well, hence the further assurance sought as our group moves forward. For the eagle eyes amongst, for falls prevention, we did indeed have a 7.5% reduction, and it does take into account the spike that we did see in September. So even with that increase in September, the trusts across the board still had a 7.5% reduction, and that's really testament to having the falls practitioners in place and going out and about on the wards as well. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Kim. You've absolutely picked up on one of my questions, but I just wanted to celebrate that reduction in falls. And if it does indeed include an increase, then it's even better, isn't it? So very, very many thanks for that. Anybody else? No? Okay, in that case, could we go on in the same spirit, Kim? On to item 9.1, which is an item that comes before the board, maternity and neonatal safety report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I start off with an apology for on page 94 of the pack, the last paragraph had two dates, and if you looked at it, the pregnancy would have been going backwards. So I do apologise, and they were both November, not November and December. So thank you. It's just to it's comprehensively covered in the Quality Assurance Committee, but we did have a huge discussion as regards the cluster of 10 neonatal perinatal deaths, and it's really important to draw that out. We fully acknowledge that November had an increase, and fully acknowledge that that number can fluctuate, and it's been the highest it has been. However, comprehensive reviews have been done for all, rapid reviews have been done for all. We have no issues or themes identified, and no actions taken would have changed the outcome. It's really important as well to note that on the full MDT reviews, we have an external partner with us, so we're not just looking inwardly, we have that ability to have that fresh eyes approach, and our sincere condolences to all for the events of they had during that month. Our induction of labour, and I know everyone hears me say it, continues to increase, and it was 28% in November and appears and is absolutely looking like an increasing trend. It's just to note that from Ockenden, Patient Choice has absolutely chosen, and Andy, one of our NEDs on the board, we had a real discussion about medically or clinically supporting a choice, but we absolutely, from the Ockenden support that choice, and we've also had a change in the NICE guidance. We're waiting for the benchmarking for 2023 because it's something we're all looking at, but I think it's important to note that in 2017 and 18, which was prior to Ockenden, the national induction of labour rate was 32.6% and noted then to be increasing. So it's really going to be interesting, and we will monitor that through future reports. The business cases for staffing, we had a large discussion around, and important to note that we prioritise the business cases that for the compliance with the clinical negligence scheme for trust, CNST compliance for year 5, and that's been really important. The care group now have done a full review of what's outstanding, because we have had some money coming down nationally that we've applied to this as well, to make sure that the business cases that have not been funded thus far are ready to go for the round 2024-2025. The transitional business case is the one that we're really focusing on getting ready to move through, because that's the one that still has most funding to be placed into. So that we'll continue to monitor that through. 2 successes is our compliance with training and our appraisal rates, which was noted. I think it's really important that the shared learning is going through appraisals with our other HRBPs, which is our HR and people partners, just to pick up some of the work that maternity and neonates have been doing. For training, like other specialist areas, emergency department, for example, critical care, it's easier to get the compliance because it's integrated and bespoke, but we are still trying to see what we can do and learn from there. And I won't cover the CNST safety action as our CEO report covered that. But it is important to note that the local maternity and neonatal meeting has now, and board has now approved our clinical negligence scheme for Trust Safety Action 8, as has the ICB. So we are now able to move forward with our full compliance, which will meet the deadline. And I shall leave it there.
Really helpful, Kim. Thank you. Certainly picked up some of the points I'd noted. I think it is to be celebrated that you've got 100% compliance on training. Really, really excellent. And I think what's encouraging about that is that it does show it can be done. I agree with you, it's perhaps easier, but nevertheless it can be done. And it's so important because it's important for the safety of staff and patients. So thank you for that. Do people have any questions for Kim on 9.1? And you briefly touched on 9.2 as well, didn't you, Kim?
Yes.
No? No, well, I think a very helpful report. People don't have any questions. So what we're asked to do, please, is to discuss and note the current position, note the, for assurance, the current cluster of neonatal and perinatal deaths that have been referred to, note the maternity services position in relation to National Patient Safety Alert for Euroking, which Steve also touched on. And then in 9.2, please, if we could approve the Year 5 submission and declaration following the approval. So if we could agree to that, please. And I'll come on to item 9.3, which is the annual complaints report. I understand Bernie was going to, and as if by magic, Bernie appears. Welcome, Bernie. Thank you very much indeed.
Morning. Thank you. Thank you, Mary. So I won't go. I'm going to take the paper as read, but just highlight a couple of particular areas. I think despite the increase that we've seen in formal complaints this year, which was a 50% increase, we've seen performance improve over the year in comparison to the previous year. Acknowledgement of complaints has consistently benchmarked above 100%. And I also just want to flag in terms of the team, and in particular the urgent and emergency care group, they consistently responded to 100% of complaints on time throughout the year, despite you know, the increased numbers that they received as a consequence of some of the operational pressures. And I don't think that that's no mean feat. And our overall performance increased to 87%. The themes broadly remain the same, though we've seen some improvements in terms of, in particular, around communication. We've also seen an increase in terms of the work that we've done around our complainant survey in terms of what does it feel like to be on the receiving end of us, which I think is important, and we'll continue to build on that and also try and get some actions out of it, particularly into some of our harder to reach groups as well in terms of that ability. And the other bit I just wanted to raise is in table 13, we had 8 PHSO cases that were open. Since this report was originally written and went through the patient experience group and QUAC, we now have 3 open. There was a question that was raised to me ahead of the board schedule about how we've closed more complaints in year than we've received. And I just want to say, in relation to the national benchmarking KO41 data, at the end of any previous year, they take into account any remaining complaints that are open from the previous year. So that's why that, I just want to explain that for you and the public, that's why that appears to be that way. Happy to take any questions.
I did think it probably was that, but I thought we need the clarity on it. I'd just like to celebrate what you've been saying and thank you and the team for the work that does go into it. You said it's no mean feat. It certainly isn't. And that's a position that we struggled with for several years, and making sure that we had got on top of it. And I think it is an indicator of how much we care and how we actually welcome complaints, because it's something that we can learn from. So thank you for the work that you're doing. I've got, I think it was Sarah first, then Ian, and then Kim.
Thank you very much, Bernie, and I completely agree with the chair that this is a massive improvement, that we're responding to people's complaints in a timely way and are genuinely desiring to learn from them and improve patient experience. However, but also to say, I know you personally have been very committed to the complaint survey, so that we understand what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that process and to make those improvements. And I really want to, you know, praise you for that and acknowledge how important that is. And of course, by asking people, they do tell us, which is good. And so I'm sure you were as disappointed as I am to read that the majority of people who completed that survey said that they were worried, or they felt that there would be a detriment to them and ongoing patient care or for their loved one by complaining. There's a really fundamental lack of trust amongst those people who completed the survey. I note you've changed the wording to the letter, but I'm just wondering if there's more that Ella and we can do as a board through our strategy work to really focus on the issue of how do we improve people's trust in us as an organisation, that we do really value complaints and will listen to them and learn from them.
So I think that there is there's still more that we can do on this, and it's about how I think we promote this in terms of the day-to-day conversations that we are going on in terms of interactions. Communication remains a top theme, and the bit around that is around how do we make sure that what is happening to our loved ones whilst they're in their care, that we have regular contact with both the patients so that they're really clear about what is the next step and why they remain here or where they're next going, and how that is then translated through to families. So I think that visibility, there's lots of different initiatives going on around the wards in relation to direct contact with some of the matrons in particular, as well as the ward leaders, but how we continue to promote that in terms of all of our literature. So there's something for me in particular around some work to do around our letters that go out to people, and how we can just reinforce that openness about keeping on talking, and our approach to actually this is really important to us. If we've not got it, we want to hear the stuff that we do really well, but equally we want to hear it when we're not, so that we can make the changes, and how valuable that kind of feedback is.
Ian.
Yeah, I've just taken my hand down, Chair, because it was a similar point on taking kind of too much positivity from a decrease in complaints and understanding actually what's driving that. So Sarah's covered that and Bernie's responded. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kim.
Yeah, it sort of fills the gap, doesn't it? I think we're doing a lot of work. You're right, Sarah. We're trying to encourage people to raise concerns whilst with us, because we know we have better outcomes, and you build up that relationship. Often the feedback when we're doing that real time is people don't want to almost offend people either. You know, the first thing they say is it's not the staff's fault, they're really, really busy, but it's how we get past that, because the busyness isn't going to go away. So how we do that real time interaction and people feel confident. Bernie's right, we're looking at where it's working better is where there's dedicated signage around, you know, posters, you know, this is the ward's leader, you know, available to take, you know, if you need to raise concerns, come and speak. Clinical matron, you know, when they're doing the senior ward rounds, you know, encourage that. Also encourage that feedback is a gift. You know, if you say it, we can do something about it and alleviate that concern. We're seeing a really a testament to Bernie and the team. We're seeing less second time complaints coming around, and that's because we're focusing very much on, as Bernie said, how would you feel if you read that? Especially, it can be all clinically correct. People expect that, but it's those little nuances, isn't it, of behaviour, communication, attitudes, and how we carry that through. So still a lot of work to do, and you can see that trust relationship, not in just complaints with public, and indeed our staff when they have a family member or a close friend in, but you can also see that link with some of the mistrust in the freedom to speak up. So I think there's a lot of work that we need to do both with staff and public to have a more open dialogue.
I think the two bits really important is about continuing around how we manage informal complaints and real timeliness around that, and we know that there's some work to do around that, and we're tracking that through the patient experience group. And two, this bit around early resolution, that face-to-face piece. All of the evidence around that shows that that is the best interaction in terms of trying to get resolution for individuals.
Thank you. Thanks, Bernie. I really like what you said, Kim, about a complaint is actually a gift, because it means we can do something about it. And Ian, I think you're asking about whether it's easier to complain via digital access. Have we any information about that?
Yeah, we've got our electronic platform, and we know that the staff pick that up really quickly and are able to, and sometimes it just gives that little barrier, doesn't it, that, you know, to take that first step into speaking. So care opinion is widely used, and we score very, very well with patients using it. The next step is to have that confidence to be able to speak up, but the platform is very well used and welcomed.
Thank you very much. Alistair.
Yeah, it is related to this, and it's partly related to people being able to speak up in the moment. I think in Isabel's overview of the Quality Assurance Committee report, there's a section in there which talks about Martha's Rule, which I think is really important to actually pull out to say. So this is based on when relatives are concerned that they're not being listened to, or they have concerns that aren't being addressed, that they have a way of raising those. And our hospital is instituting something called Call for Concern, which has been piloted in cardiology and is going to be rolled out across the trust, and was presented by Claire Blake, our matron for our head of nursing for ACCT at Quality Assurance Committee. And that's yet another way that people can raise their concerns in the moment. And as you say, doing it in the moment is much better than writing something down later when everything's happened. It's much more likely to end up with a good resolution. So I think it's important to just pull that out of the paper, the quack report. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. I think it's really important you refer to the Martha's Rule, because clearly there's been a lot of coverage of that. And so for members of the public, it's good to hear you emphasise that point. Are there others, Adam, and then Ella?
Thank you, Bernie, and the team for the work and the real focus on improvement. It's great to see. It's a question on the report and the looking ahead section 10 on page 171 of our pack. The first item references the unfortunate loss of the office space available to support people who needed support around their experience. And I just wonder if there's any update on recognising the challenges around the estate, but is there any update on being able to provide space for the patient experience team?
It's a real focus. We still haven't got a definite date yet, but a space has been identified for us to move into, so that we can start to do some of that face-to-face interactions on site. So we're continuing to work on it, and I hope that we get a definitive date in the next month.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bernie. I think it'd be really good for the board just to have that update through whichever is the appropriate committee. We'll make a note of that. Ella, I'm so sorry I didn't see you.
No problem at all. It was just in response really to Sarah's point around where does it fit within our strategy, etc. And I think it very much for me links to it's our culture work, isn't it? So it's around our how do we do our honesty part of our values, and how do we support our staff to encourage patients in the moment to be honest, to give the feedback. So I think it fits in there, and we probably, Bernie and I are working with Alison around how do we feed some of these key themes into our OD, so Organisational Development Programme. That's for me where it sits. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Bernie, please hear the board saying thank you for this piece of work and for the work of your team. It really is great to see. And we're asked to approve the annual complaints report 22-23. Thank you. If you could do that, I'll move on then to Alistair for our Learning from Deaths Q2 report.
Thank you. So the Quality Assurance Committee has extensively reviewed the Learning from Death report, as well as the Mortality Review Oversight Group and the Executive Leadership Team and Clinical Effectiveness Group. I think the parts that I'd like to pull out of the Q2 report are specifically around crude mortality and HSMR, which you'll see later through the integrated performance report, have gradually been falling over most of the year, and our HSMR has decreased in Q2 to 102, and that benchmarks favourably against our neighbours in the southwest. I think in a positive note, we're fully recruited into our medical examiner service. So this is a service which scrutinises all deaths across RCHT and our community, apart from deaths that directly are referred to the coroner. And our mortality team within the hospital work very closely with the medical examiner service, which is a service under the auspices of the Cornwall coroner. And we've had that up and running, fully staffed ahead of the final go live date for the whole system, which was in April of 2024. So we're doing very well with that. I guess it's important that we highlight a Regulation 28 case that the coroner wrote, which was around us on our surgical wards having hybrid use of both electronic notes and paper notes, which led to an incident which the coroner has highlighted. So that's outlined in the report as well. I think in the interest of time, I think we have scrutinised this considerably at a number of committees, so I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you very much, Alistair. Colleagues, are there questions? Yes, Sarah.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate that this will have been scrutinised at a committee that I'm not a member of. But I'm just thinking about the previous paper we've seen and saying that on a lot of the complaints are coming from frail elderly, they're coming from around discharges. And I see here the key themes from inquests are around delayed admissions and discharges. So again, two sides of the same problem. I appreciate the considerable ongoing operational pressures, but I'm just wondering, from both complaints and this learning, are there some areas that the board needs to be focused on? Are there any consistent areas related to that the board needs to be focused on to help improve the situation?
So as with all complaints and learning from death, communication, I think, is in all aspects of its of what we talk about, communication is really important. So communication with patients and relatives while they're in the hospital, but also communication with other parts of our system on discharge is really key. So getting discharge right for our patients can be very complicated. We have a lot of patients who have really quite complex discharge with lots of people being involved in those, and getting those right is absolutely key. There are some metrics in the IPR around discharge summaries, which are again have been improving. But I think for me, the biggest thing is communication with families and relatives. I think from a mortality point of view, one of the things that we do structured judgment reviews on any death in the hospital where there is an associated complaint. So complaints are triangulated with mortality and incidents as well. So so that is a positive. But there's always more that we can do around communication and discharge, Sarah. I wonder whether Kim or anybody might want to comment on any further aspects of that.
So Sarah, not to forget that one of the joint priorities last year was safe discharge. So we'd recognised the Health Watch audit and report that came out about across Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, people's feeling of unsafe discharge. And I think Alistair's hit one of the actions absolutely on the head. It is about that early communication. It's also socialising people's discharge from the point of admission. Often it was our almost lack of preparation for family, as well as the patient, in keeping them up to date on their estimated date of discharge, what they could expect. And it was the quality priority was across RCHT and CFT, because a lot of our patients pass through both organisations' services. So how did we join up? And so whilst it's not a joint priority this year, there are still actions that will come through various reports, because we still have outstanding things to do. So you'll see that coming through, but just important to note that.
Perhaps, Kim, before I bring you in on what you want to speak about, I'd just comment on that point too. I think, Alistair, you talked about the number of different people who are necessarily involved in discharge and communication. For me, I think there's something about who coordinates that. Who's doing the whole person piece, because it is a number of people, and as well as the communication to them, between them, it's who has that oversight of everything about that one person. And, you know, many times the patient does, or their own family, but who does it within the trust?
So that's a really good question. So we have invested in our discharge coordinators on the ward, which is a really important function of these staff. I think there is more that we can do. And I think Robin and I have been talking just in the last few days about sort of MDT style with our community providers, with our ICB colleagues, with safeguarding, how we can create an MDT for these really complicated discharges. Often people going with multiple agencies into their own homes on discharge from RCHT, and you have to get the district nurse, and you might have to get carers, you might have to get voluntary sector in, relatives, etc., including things like virtual ward and acute care at home. So there may be multiple agencies. So I think that coordination of discharge, both by our discharge coordinators on the ward, but also by a multidisciplinary team, is something that we could do better, and that we're talking actively with the ICB about how we do that at the moment.
Thank you very much, Alistair. Kim, did you have a separate point you wanted to make?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It was just a point. Really important on page 185, the very case 4, the really sad death of a gentleman in our care with learning disabilities. We fully recognised, and an update from there is it's a whole system review. This is a really complex case and has been accepted by the Safeguarding Adults Board, and a full Safeguarding Adults review is underway with all system partners from primary care right the way through to us, and you'll see that progress through, which is really important to note. Going back to the discharge question, it's not to forget in our community with my dual role that we also have navigators, and how do we best join up people so that it's not disjointed, and having that full picture is really important.
Thank you, Kim. I love that word, navigator. Very appropriate. Okay, we're asked then to... Oh, sorry, Adam. I told you you'd have to wave your hand a lot.
To be fair to you, I've only just waved it. So, thank you for the paper. An observation and a question. So going back to, I think Mary mentioned at the beginning about abbreviations. This felt like a paper with a lot of abbreviations that we don't need to go through now, but if we could pick that up for next time, that would be really appreciated. There were several, I just don't know what they mean. That would be really helpful.
Yes. So,
and then the question is around the benchmarking. So I can see that we're benchmarking with Southwest trusts. I suppose what I don't know is whether it's meaningful to benchmark with Southwest trusts, and whether they are comparable, reasonably comparable with the circumstances of RCHT, or whether there would be a benefit in benchmarking with a different set of trusts across the country, if that's even possible, that have got more similarities with us than some of the ones in that list.
So, yes. So the if I remember correctly, the SHME does that, which is in the integrated performance report. So that I need to look into that in more detail, but I can ask the team if they can look at that for the next report.
Okay,
thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. So we're asked to receive and note the Learning from Death's Q2 report, and then move on again to Alistair on the 7-day services board assurance framework.
Yes, so thank you. So this report received partial assurance at the Quality Assurance Committee for reasons that we've already discussed around other reports. I think this is 7-day services report is designed to ensure that patients who are admitted through our emergency front door, whatever day they come in, can get the same care. This particular report was ceased during COVID and has recently restarted. And for this cycle, we've elected to audit against 6 of the 10 national standards, and that includes 4 which NHS England believe have the greatest effect on health outcomes, and those are double starred in the report. this, in order to do this piece of work, it does take quite a lot of clinical time, auditing sets of notes across the hospital. So getting our various clinical services to engage with this across the period that we've done this, which has been a very challenged operational time, has been difficult. But the clinical effectiveness group and my deputy medical director for clinical effectiveness, Nick Michelle, has produced this. Now, I think it's clear to say that we have quite a lot of variability in some of these metrics across the hospital. And at the moment, it would be difficult to assure the board that that we're fully compliant with these standards, and clearly the paper outlines where we're not. And where we don't have data. But in the appendix, we have an action plan which needs more work by March to outline a long list of actions by specialty, by care group and by standard, by which we will gain that assurance over the next 6 to 9 months. There are some services which are doing remarkably well, considering the difficulties. So, if I just pull out a few of those, so in imaging, in terms of critical CT, we're generally doing very well, and that's reflected, I think, in some of the metrics related to 4-hour CT for stroke, etc. In endoscopy, we're managing to scope 100% of the GI bleeds within the appropriate time frame. We have regular medical shift handovers and surgical shift handovers, but an example is of where we're not meeting that full standard would be that we don't currently have records of who attends those handovers. So there's a number of actions that we need to take forward over the next few months to ensure ourselves that for all of these standards, we're meeting our national standards. So I'm happy to take any questions on the paper, but as I said, this does provide only partial assurance that we're meeting these 7-day standards at the moment.
Thank you, Alistair. Then maybe questions. I appreciate what a lot of clinical work this is, and yet it's vital, isn't it?
It is.
And in the examples already showing, they are absolutely vital. And I think that some of them indicate again this need to be sure we're communicating not just with patients and families, but with community service providers as well as ourselves. I was wondering when I was reading the report, and this may be a very stupid suggestion, would it be possible to get this externally done so we weren't using our own clinical time, and potentially would also have a sort of an independent eye view on it? But I don't know if that's a daft suggestion.
It's a good suggestion. It could be done. There's no reason why Audit Southwest couldn't do an audit against these standards. I think we would need to work through carefully in terms of clinical time that would be needed for that as well. I suspect that it would still need some clinical time, but it is definitely alternative. I think what I would suggest is that we bring back a report which, when we've got our action plan outlined with appropriate timeframes, lead clinicians across all of those specialties, and that through Clinical Effectiveness Group and Quality Assurance Committee, we assure the board that way that we're on top of this. I'm confident that we can get there, but I think there are operational challenges which make this quite a challenging piece of work.
Thank you for that, Alistair. Any idea of timescale on when that might come back into a committee or board?
Yeah, well, so I think in the action plan, by March, by the end of March, we should be this should be fully populated. So I would hope that by April we'd be able to bring something back.
Thank you, Alistair. Ella.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it might have already been considered, Alistair, through EPR, the electronic patient record, will things like recording, because a lot of it is we're not actually, or there's no evidence of the documentation having happened. Is that going to be easier? And are we going to kind of build in, I suppose, it's that nudge theory, isn't it, of you almost can't progress without doing the things you need to do?
Yes, absolutely. I think a lot of the metrics here, like a really good one would be time to initial consultant review. You know, as soon as you go into a new EPR, there's a timestamp for who's been in, what they've said. So that will make it much easier to do these audits. We'll be able to just pull out that information automatically, or certainly for some of the standards, we will be able to do that. Yeah, thank you.
That's helpful too.
Great.
Thanks, Ella. Ian?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wondered as to, are there any implications of us not being fully compliant at this point beyond the obvious in terms of, you know, the patient care and quality aspects? Are there any external?
No, there aren't any at the moment. Not in terms of regulatory input or anything like that, if that's what you mean. I think a lot of this is around how it's documented. You know, I think a lot of it actually happens, but we don't document things very well. MDTs, for instance, are often, you know, several people in a room, and the question is, do you write down that everybody was there and you know, and who was there at the time to make it a proper MDT rather than just a discussion between two people. So I think sometimes it's how we document these things which is the issue, which makes it really difficult without actually physically looking at the notes to see who was there.
That's interesting, Alistair, because that was something that we weren't very good at around duty of candour. And we've managed to get on top of that documenting around duty of candour really well. I wonder if there's any learning from what we did there that we could use.
I can talk to Bernie about that, absolutely.
Thank you. Steve and then Robin, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Really important paper, Alistair. Thank you. And I particularly found the thrombolysis and stroke information in the paper really helpful. There's a lot of detail in there, in the summary and in Appendix 2. So one of the things that you've highlighted is the challenge around thrombolysis within an hour, and I think the paper shows that we're at 1 hour 4 against the national average of 54, and there's a lot of information in there about some of the challenges to us. But I just wanted to test to what extent are the operational pressures that we're experiencing an impacting factor or not, and if they are, what impact would we expect to see if we're able to make improvements around those patient flow priorities that we've got?
Yeah, so I think that's going to be quite a difficult thing to tease out because of the geography of our county. It does take a long time sometimes for people to come in to RCHT. Often people come in with minor strokes and they made their own way in. So I think, but there's no doubt that we have missed the thrombolysis window for a number of patients, and whenever that happens, we have a datix, we work it through an incident process, and it would go through to the incident review and learning group, through clinical effectiveness, and back through to quality assurance committee. Instances like that where there's, for instance, maybe a category 2 ambulance delay, those sorts of things would be investigated in collaboration with our community partners as well. So SWAST would be involved in those, whether there's anything that we could do to improve ambulance handover. So I think, Steve, in the long and short of it is, yes, I think things would improve if we could improve ambulance handover and the category 2 response times. I think they would improve.
Thank you, Steve. Rob.
Thank you. I was actually going to pick up in the IPR section that we're in the process of updating our internal professional standards, and for people listening in, that's effectively a set of clinical key performance indicators we try and strive to achieve. And reading the paper, Alistair, I was thinking actually there's some pieces in there, not all of to answer the reporting bit, but some of them do fit quite well into how we could update our internal professional standards. We have a twice a day site meeting which goes through our internal professional standards, and we want to try and integrate that. So I think there's an action for us to take here, which is through that work we're already doing, let's take this report and make sure that where we can integrate them well into that internal professional standards, because our BI team are working with us to be able to report those internal professional standards. We can, on a day-to-day basis in live format, assess how we're doing against that, and that will help with this, but it won't cover all of that.
So I think that's a really good idea. I think just to be clear, normally internal professional standards are in hospitals across the country. They are the way that individuals respond to various asks. How quickly should you see a patient? How quickly should you see a referral, etc. I think we've been talking, and it's often focused around medical staff. I think we've been talking recently with our senior clinical leadership, with Robin, around having the similar sorts of standards for how quickly should you expect a therapy review, how quickly should you expect to get an ultrasound in an urgent situation versus an elective situation. So we're talking about expanding our internal professional standards to take in some of these other standards as well.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? No. So thank you for the report. I think we're asked to discuss and review the findings and to receive for assurance. And I think what we're saying is we'll receive it for partial assurance, with a further paper coming back in April through QUAC. Yes, absolutely. And also that there's an action that you and Robert are already work on, but to pick up trying to integrate all of the professional standards in the trust. So if people would be happy to indicate your approval or otherwise. We'll move on again, Alistair, with you to the controls drugs annual report.
Yes, so Jill Derrick is our controlled drugs accountable officer. She's joined us online to feedback on this report, which again has been through a number of committees, including Quality Assurance Committee. I'll hand over to Jill. Thanks, Jill.
Yes, thank you, Alistair. Hello, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. So yes, the Trust has various statutory requirements and responsibilities in the handling of controlled drugs. And a lot of the controlled drugs that we think of are Schedule 2 controlled drugs, which would be the ones that would be administered in theatre and on the wards, morphine and opiates, etc. But we also need to monitor other drugs that can be abused, and they'd be Schedules 3 to 5 in the list of controlled drugs. So I've been the Controlled Drugs Accountable Officer for about 5 years now. It's a CQC registered post, and our responsibilities are that we attend the Controlled Drugs Local Intelligence Network, and the organisation submits various occurrence reports every quarter. I have some excellent deputies, Mike Wilcock and Ian Davidson. Ian Davidson is also the Home Office licence holder, because we supply controlled drugs to other organisations in the region as well. And the pharmacy team are really, really integral to how we do manage and monitor and control the use of controlled drugs across the organisation. So in terms of our statutory responsibilities, the Trust does meet those. We have up-to-date policies. We attend the CD-LIN, the local intelligence networks, and we submit accurate occurrence reports. We have a controlled drugs advisory group, which I chair, and we run everything through our medication practice committee, which involves all sorts of other aspects of pharmacy, including patient safety issues and incidents. And we are fortunate to have a lot of electronic monitoring sort of systems where we can monitor ordering of drugs, all drugs, including controlled drugs, and we can monitor the administration and the overall volumes and variances as such. And so we use all those various reports to just monitor and track our ordering, supply, use of controlled drugs across the organisation. And the report does identify some of the variances that we've uncovered. This report covers the 22 to 23 year. Obviously, we're well into 23, 24 now, but it went to Quality Assurance Committee in November. So this is the first board that we're able to present it at. We look at variance reports, and if there are any obvious variances from sort of normal or routine numbers, the ward pharmacists then go in and investigate and go down to patient level detail. If there had been a particular patient on the ward at that time that was a high user of drugs appropriately, then that can be accounted for. And so we're left with the losses that can't be accounted for that could be down to misappropriation. We tend to have more problems with our Schedule 3 to Schedule 5 drugs. So there'll be things like zopiclone sedatives and codeine-based drugs that don't have to be locked up and signed in and out of the storage cupboards. And we do have various investigations over both the 22-23 year and the 23-24 year to date, where we don't always identify an individual. So we work closely with the ward management teams who have to do their monitoring and look at staff rosters and things, and our counter fraud specialists as well, to just sort of factor that out. And then in terms of other national sort of criteria and recommendations, you may well know of the Gosport review that was some time ago, which identified abnormal and criminal practices of prescribing and sedating of elderly patients. So we run an annual report on that. This report references the 22-23 report, or the 21-22 report that was reviewed in 22. We have looked at the report, Gosport Inquiry Surveillance Report for this year, 23, but it'll be included in next year's board report for the Controlled Drugs Accountable Officer. And we do regular audits over and above our electronic reports, which would be on the CD use and management and documentation in theatres, so our controlled drugs books checks, and on the wards as well. And we obviously take learning from DATEXs of unexplained losses, etc. Unexplained losses would be not so much the ordering and supply variations, but when the drugs are totted up at the end of each day, then there will be usually volumes of liquid that are slightly less than have been, or drug errors where one drug has been administered when it should have been another drug, and that would be things like gabapentin or pregabalin, which are very similar sort of sounding drugs or sort of groups of drugs. So they tend to be lower level issues really, and we've done various things to try and improve the recording of liquid drugs. So in terms of the conclusions, we do comply with the statutory requirements. We are improving in our completion rates of the various audits. We have I think we have a reasonable assurance framework, including our controlled drugs advisory group. We do have some concerning instances where there is ongoing losses or possible misappropriation of abusable medicines, but we are monitoring and maintaining our investigations into that. I think the only thing to say, similar to Alistair's point about audits, there is a significant workload to audit and analyse the data, and particularly if further investigations are required. And you will see that there are some concerns around the training records and people's up to date in training, recognising what we sometimes find in terms of ESR registering as well. So I think that's all I have to say, so I can take questions if anyone has any concerns.
Comprehensive report. There may be some questions. There's just one point already been raised by yourself, Richard, around it being more assuring and helpful if we could summarise in the report what the Gosport inquiry was looking into, because otherwise it's a standalone statement. So I don't know whether that could be incorporated.
Yes, yes, we can totally take that back, yes.
Lovely, thank you for that. Are there any other points to be raised? No, Jill, I think you've done a very comprehensive job. There don't seem to be any, but thank you for the piece of work, because I do note what you're saying about it is a lot of work, and yet it is absolutely vital that it should be done. Andy?
I just have one question on page 229 of 566. There's a comment about an individual being investigated for a different CD practice issue, but has now left RCHT and the NHS. That doesn't remove the issue with that individual, and I just wondered whether RCHT has communicated with whoever is employing that individual regarding this issue.
Thank you, Andy. Important point. Jill, are you able to answer that?
Yes, I can answer that. So the individual left the trust in 2021. In terms of, they've also left the UK as well. So in terms of, as you quite rightly say, tracking and making sure that that practice is not causing a patient safety issue elsewhere, We referred to the GMC. We've also referred to the local authority designate officer where the police are represented. So all of the, we also asked for a health professionals alert notice to be issued about him. So all of that is in hand. The GMC are taking this investigation further, and there is a tribunal due in a couple of weeks, whether that doctor will actually be subsequently registered with the GMC. And the GMC have been trying to contact the home country of the doctor involved.
That's reassuring me. Thank you.
Thank you. If there aren't any more questions, then we are asked to receive and note the Controlled Drugs Accountable Officer Annual Report for 22-23 and note the management actions listed in the report, and also that the report will include just a brief summary of the Gosport inquiry to make it clearer. So thank you, Jill, very much. You're very welcome to stay. I'm sure you won't. And we are going to move on. We're hoping to get to lunch by 12:20. So we've still got a bit to do. So if I could hand over to you, Robin, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll take the report as read. I'll highlight to colleagues that on our segmentation framework, we are on 8 green indicators, 2 amber indicators and 10 red. So it's still not where we were better earlier in the year, but still improved from where we started the year. I will highlight, and Steve highlighted in his report as well, but just so we don't miss it, the pressure that our emergency department is under. And I often say to the board to keep an eye on the aggregated patient delay, the APD. For people listening in, that is from when the ED episode has ended till the patient leaves the department, either home or to the ward. And you can see that number's changed significantly. Most of my update was around the internal professional standards, which we covered in Alistair's section, as how we're trying to respond to that. Quality Assurance Committee did do a review of our referral to treatment, and I'm pleased to say that all specialties, with the exception of orthopaedics, as was reported, are currently forecasting to be 65-week compliant, and we have a number of specialties that we are focusing on the 52-week standard, and sort of links to Ian's point earlier in the meeting about how are we keeping our teams focused on the next bit of the future. Orthopaedics is our challenge spot, and it is said in the report, but to highlight to colleagues that Steve, Alistair and myself did an all-consultant meeting at the beginning of December to talk through what the challenges are that the team have there. We have a number of actions, and we've got a bridge now that shows that what is mathematically possible for us to achieve 0.78 weeks by the end of the financial year. It's very ambitious. It's important for the board to be aware that that's a very stretched target, but still mathematically achievable. And all of our efforts are in making sure that we are maximising the use of our capacity to achieve that. And we are actively seeking support from organisations such as GERF, Getting It Right First Time, which is a national body that can help us with learning and can help with peer clinical challenge so that we're making best use of that capacity. So it is through Quality Assurance Committee and Finance and Performance Committee, we are keeping high scrutiny on how that plan is working. Region are working through us, and so are GERFT on actions and support towards that. And our Integrated Care Board are owning a range of actions for independent sector capacity as well to try and support our population of Cornwall getting access to treatments. I'll briefly mention cancer before I then do my round everybody else, which is an improving position as we said we would be in. So our combined 31-day is just above the target now at 96.16%. Our combined 62-day performance is below the target at 72%, but improving and heading towards 85%. And colleagues remember previous updates around how we responded to the dermatology backlog, and that plan still remains on track and delivering. And then a success story to end on, which is the combined diagnostics has moved from 55% to 70%. Against the target 75%, so not quite there yet. But again, as the commitments we made heading in that direction, my deputy Joe Floyd still runs the weekly cancer delivery board, which is micromanaging all of the relevant actions. So that would be my whistle stop ops. And then if I I jump, Alice, is there anything you want to highlight?
No, I think in terms of the papers I've already presented, I think it's covered most of the IPR. So thanks, no.
Thank you. Kim?
No, I think we've covered everything at Quack, so nothing additional.
Lovely. And Alison?
Yeah, I did actually just want to give a little bit of detail in terms of the people metrics, if that's okay. And there's a little bit of background here in terms of turnover, seeing for the first time that lovely green colour, but also looking at our ethnic minority staff and looking at the trends. We've reduced the turnover in our BAME staff from 16% to 10%. Now, I know recently we've had a little bit of an additional increase of turnover, but when you look over the last year, we are making some inroads on that. I also want to thank everybody, care groups in particular, for their support in the continued increase in appraisals. And again, we've got the best result that we've had for a long time, with another 2.5% increase. And then behind the scenes as well, recognising the work of the people on OD team and occupational health. In terms of absence, although absence is 4.8%, I just want to reflect on some figures of long-term sickness. So in 2021 we had 91 nurses off with long-term sickness. In 2022 we reduced that to 80 nurses, and now last year we had 67 nurses with long-term sickness. So we are making some inroads in that respect as well. So I just wanted to give Trust Board a little bit of more context. Thank you.
You, Mary.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask one thing of Alison. Is there any evidence that the turnover with our ethnic groups of staff is linked with the way we're managing our inclusion and diversity policies? Is there a sort of beneficial or detrimental effect, or is there not a link?
I'm not so much sure about policies. I think it's around, we now have a more diverse workforce than we've ever had, which is great, and it's 3 times more diverse than our community. There are some challenges. We know from a racial discrimination that we still have to face. There's a lot more, and I know we're coming to a report later on around what we need to do to improve our understanding and education and support all of our management and staff in this respect. So I think the policies that we've put in place are good, but I think it's that everyday support that we all need, and calling it out actually when things are not acceptable and not walking by, which I think we need to do a lot more down on the ground to make sure that is happening everywhere.
Thanks. We'll probably cover some of that in the report on the equality standards. Kim?
Yeah, to just further, I agree, Alison. The policies in place are good. I think it's the practical application. I think it's the wider cultural understanding. We have a very active Stay and Thrive work going on within both CFT and RCHT. The feedback we're getting is that people do feel supported and thrived in the main, but that's that concern of the wider community integration where they don't feel connected to communities, and how I think as a system we resolve that is going to be key critical to us being able to hold on longer term to our globally educated group.
Thanks, Kim. Just before bringing Richard in, I think you make a very good point, and I recall a presentation we had at board a few years ago, and a member of staff who joined us described severe loneliness in that it was all right at work, but when she went home, she didn't know anybody. And I remember thinking at the time, and I did talk to quite a lot of people about it, but when you consider what a huge number of people the NHS employs in Cornwall, it might be nice to do some thinking about how we could get some sort of buddying scheme where people might be invited into people's homes or something like that. The forces are very good at this, and we might learn from there. As a child, my family frequently hosted people who were in foreign places, and I don't know whether there is anything existing or whether we might do some thinking about that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I know we do active work with especially churches and other groups, but I think there's that widening out.
Thank you. Alison.
Yeah, just on that particular point, we have with our most recent overseas inductees actually been doing that sort of introduced to local communities piece. But of course, there's a lot of staff that would have joined the trust where we didn't have that scheme in place.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we could do a board member host somebody to Sunday lunch or something like that. But thank you for the work. And Robin, thank you for going over the integrated performance report. We're asked to discuss for assurance and note the month 8 performance under the domains of safe, high quality care, supported and valued people, and journey of improvement. So, Richard, I've written you down and forgotten you. Sorry.
Ever thus. Just 2 questions, really. Thank you. It was one is around the emergency department. Again, Robin, thank you. You are directing our attention to those aggregated patient delays, and I know the slide in that. I think if I'm right, it's now over 2.5 years of patient time in that 139 weeks. Is there anything as a board that we can do in directing resources to support that flow? Because I'm well aware of all of the extensive work that's going on to drive that metric down, and to not just drive the metric down, but to give the right care for our patients. Is there anything we could do differently in our resource allocation at a board level?
I think that there's an ongoing piece of work that we need to finalise on our capacity and demand. So we are in need of finalising when does our demand arrive at our front doors, and it's more than just the emergency department. It's the SDMA, same day medical assessment unit, the same day surgical assessment unit, making sure that we're appropriately maximising the staffing resource for the time of day that the patients arrive. And I would suggest that from a board perspective, once we've concluded that capacity and demand analysis, then we might be in a position to talk about whether it's a more resource or a change of resource needed to support that. And I would say for everybody listening in that the committees are very supportive of the appropriate challenge from both quality and performance perspective. And the committees and the board have supported investment cases as they've come forward in support of the challenges that we face at the front door. It's a wider piece, and the reason I highlight aggregated patient delay is if that delivers the quality changes that we're all driving for, but it also, if the aggregated patient delay drops in the emergency department, it means that there's space in the emergency department to reduce those ambulance holds, and that's why I didn't highlight ambulance holds specifically. The main piece for us all is to keep that very consistent message that we are zero tolerance to delays in our emergency department, and that when any of our colleagues are coming up with ideas, are really embracing our QI ambassadors, etc., to be coming up with the ideas that make a difference. And from a real small thing but big actually is when colleagues are doing your executive and non-executive walkarounds, really encouraging colleagues that we want to be that space where it's okay to escalate. We really want people to say, somebody hasn't turned up and it's been 20 minutes and they should have done. That's not a negative that you're raising that. We really want people to feel safe, because then we can act on it. And every time somebody puts their hands up and says something hasn't happened, we can act. And we can act in the supportive way, the respectful way, our cultural way that RCHT is, to make that move happen, which impacts the patient in a positive way. And the consistent message from all of us to our colleagues is, it really is okay, and we want you to say when something's not working. because then we can all move forward. You saying something's not working doesn't mean somebody isn't doing their job right. You're saying it's not working. So Richard, that would be my big ask for all of us because we are all out and about having those conversations, and that would help. Thank you.
Thank you. My apologies, Richard.
No. It's a joke.
I know. So could we then please agree that we have discussed and noted this report and move on to our Finance Performance Committee and ask you first, Richard?
Thank you. Again, in the interest of time, I'll take the report as read and apologise for the long report. Just to remind colleagues, we didn't get the chance at December because of timing to look at the integrated performance review, so it's been helpful to do that here today. Ask board members to note the recommendations to the board that we've made, and then just highlight some areas of escalation. I think they're all in the same theme, really. One is just a need for us to align our system recovery programme with the Trust's cost improvement programme, just to ensure that we have a robust monitoring of our productivity, efficiency and savings, and that work's already being done, so it's just a reminder for us that we need to do that. Secondly, it's a need to ensure that assurance from the ICB, our Integrated Care Board, that the full system response to operational performance to achieve our half-year plan, because there are so many codependencies in there. So it's really just that the boards need to keep a dialogue of assurance between them. And then thirdly, I've asked that the whole board be given a briefing at an appropriate point on our transformation programme, an assurance in capacity and capability to deliver in support of the work that's been doing by Finance Performance Committee. We'll continue to do the deep dive into that, but it would be really helpful, just given the scale of that the whole board is cited on that, in support of that. A bit like Isabel, there are a number of areas of partial assurance, as she reported in Quality Assurance Committee report, and I just wanted to stress that none of those imply that... Too many negatives, sorry. We would take assurance that all is being done across the work of the organisation in an intensive and comprehensive way in all areas. So there is no lack of assurance around that. The partial assurances where they exist is really a reflection of the high risk environment in which we are operating, and the fact that those metrics teeter on the necessary, but they're environmental, not the internal environment in delivery. My only comment on the paper that we've got before us on the month 8 report is just to highlight, because we said as Finance and Performance Committee that we would focus on the cash position particularly, and because we've got a number of areas of finance that have a latency and a delay in them in decisions that have been made centrally, that we took great assurance that the cash position will improve, but in a temporary way because of that latency and the delay of payment. The cash reserves were dropping a little bit below where we would set our threshold, but we took assurance that they will come back in time as those payments come back into the trust. Ian may want to say a little bit about that during his report, but beyond that, happy to take questions on the report.
Thanks very much, Richard. Are there questions for Richard? I just did have one. Ella, you first.
Well, it was just to add really to the escalation or the request, I suppose, from Richard around getting that oversight of our transformation programme, and we're going to start the work on doing that at our board strategy development session on the 18th of January, where the agenda is going to focus on our strategic priorities and the transformation portfolio, and are we kind of in the best place we can be to deliver on those.
That's really helpful, thank you. My question, and I think it was on your report, Richard, was the discussion about the mitigation in terms of the revenue was around reduction of agency, but actually we then noted that agency use was increasing in month, and I just wanted our whole board to be aware of that, because that's where we are. And I don't know whether you want to say any more about that, but it seems contradictory, and yet that is where we are.
Yes, I think it's something that Finance Performance Committee are keeping a very close eye on, and a detailed scrutiny of our agency costs. We have made a cross-reference to People and Culture Committee that they just have a look at, if they would have a look at the the rules around agency and how well they're embedded through the system, and then in terms of our resource panel in the allocation and the agreement to utilise agency, and just because it falls into the debate of people and culture committee, just to make sure that they're assured that all of those rules of engagement around agency and the delivery and operationalisation of those rules are running as we would expect.
And when will you be hearing back about that?
Not sure that we've got a date back. I'll look to Lindsay or Adam.
Sorry, the action has been referred to the People and Culture Committee. Alison may wish to comment as well, but the committee are meeting in February, so that we'll have an update then, and we can hopefully report back in March. Alison, I'm hoping.
Alison, I think you want to come in, and then you, Ian. Alison?
Yes, so on how well the rules are embedded, we are refreshing the terms of reference, which is starting this week with the resource panel, and it will have a three-part approach to reviewing CAF's agenda for change increases, agency expenditure, and any other variation to pay. So we're putting those rules in place and also enabling deputies to attend the resource panel, so that there should always be 2 exec directors or a deputy, at that resource panel every 2 weeks. So those are the changes that we're making now.
For that, Ian.
Yeah, and just to add to your questions, they're really appropriate, and it is a bit of a catch-22 in some respects. But we've been doing a lot of work, which I'll talk about in a minute, in terms of forecast review meetings with each care group, because we do sit as an outlier in terms of our use of agencies, as a national outlier, and it's something that our clinical teams and operational teams are keen to reduce the reliance on. We've done lots of good work on substantive recruitment into example healthcare assistant roles, to reduce the need there. But as we need to open capacity to manage the acute pressures and the ambulance delays that Steve referred to, that is the balance, and that is a risk to our financial position that it's absolutely appropriate for the board to be aware of.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Are there any other questions for Richard? Okay, so we're asked to note the report from the November and December meetings, and we're asked to approve the recommendation to the Trust Board to approve the receipt of 0.505 in relation to endoscopy, recommend the approval of the receipt of 0.329 million in, I think I'm just repeating myself, sorry, and recommend that the Trust Board, at its meeting on the 7th of November, approves the business case for interventional radiology, which I believe we did. So if we could please agree those approvals, and move on to item 11.4, the month 8 revenue report, please. Ian.
So in keeping with others, I'll take the report as read and just highlight a few key elements. So just to remind colleagues and the public, so this is the first report we've had at the board since we did what we call the H2 reset. So essentially that's a reset of our year-to-date financial position and our commitment to achieve break-even by the end of the year. So this isn't a different budget. We'd always committed to a break-even budget, but the industrial action between April and October significantly impacted that. So at the end of month 7, we were £4.4 million adverse to the plan that we'd set. What you'll see in the paper is that following the national funding that was allocated to systems in respect of industrial action, a significant proportion of that, so that all came in the November position. So what that means is that, and you see it best at the top of page 323 of 566 in the pack, is the profile by month now. So our variance reduced to, the plan expected variance was to reduce to 617,000 adverse from plan. I'm pleased to report that we were slightly better than that at 557 against plan. Within that, there are a number of factors. So we did see increased cost from an agency perspective with the opening of some additional capacity in November. We will continue to have some impacts from industrial action, which I'll come to in a minute. but the other thing we did also see that was beneficial is that we continue to perform really well on elective recovery. So the work we're doing in elective recovery it is really positive. So in the paper, you see the position as set out at 107.8%, which was based on the month 5 national data. We've since had the month 6 national data, and that trend has continued to be strong and improved. So we're now at 108.8% compared to the 1920 baseline for our elective activity. So that's really positive to be keeping that level of performance up around our electives, given the operational pressures that we've described. The absolute key piece of work is, that's a nice spreadsheet that describes the journey to the end of March. It's really about the hearts and minds and making sure we're taking all relevant actions to deliver that. So I alluded to, I've held with Ella's team and Ella a series of, and Robin's team, a series of forecast review meetings with care groups to really just reiterate to them why it's important, because to most of our staff, understanding why the financial balance is important, isn't first priority. I get that. So at 2.5 in the report on the same page 323, we've outlined some of the key considerations and some of the positive impacts we get from achieving financial break-even. So they were reiterated to each care group, along with the requirement for care groups to get to a target forecast variance by the end of the year. Those meetings were really well received, and I'm confident we've got a really strong message out amongst the teams from that. The final bit, so we've touched on cash, so just to update on the cash position at the end of end of December, 10.4 million was the cash balance, so that's a partial improvement from the noted cash position in the report, and we expect that to improve again in January. And that, just to be clear to people so that that's understandable, that relates to the payment for the industrial action funding and the timing of us receiving that, having paid out for the costs of that already, and the overperformance on elective recovery and the income of that being received by the trust. So they're the two key things that materially affect the cash position. Cash is something I remain concerned about, and we as a board should remain concerned about. It's something that with the Finance Performance Committee, we have a regular update on every month, and we have a deep dive every quarter. So just to give that level of reassurance as well in terms of the steps that we're taking. And then just to finish, really, it's the industrial action costs. We will start to see those in the month 9 report for the 3 days industrial action that we had in December. We'll also be able to put a better estimate on the January implications for the strikes that are currently taking place. And that's something that we'll be reporting on in future in terms of how we can mitigate that, what options exist to us, what steps we've taken with regulators to try and get greater clarity on that. But that linked with the operational pressures are the things that will be our biggest challenges. But I think I'm reasonably confident we're doing everything that I'd want to be doing at this point, but happy to take questions or comments on that paper. Chair.
It's really helpful, thank you. And I really like that section 2.5. I think it's a really key thing to offer a narrative to why it is worth managing our budgets and not doing the opposite. So, well done for that series of meetings. Really good. Isabel, your hand.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Ian. Really good report. I suppose I have just two things drifting around in my brain. One is, clearly we have to focus on getting over the line by the end of this financial year in terms of what we're trying to achieve financially. I'm wondering what work is also going on looking ahead, because the financial picture isn't going to get much easier, I suspect. And so therefore we need to keep our foot on the pedal around that. So are there additional things that are going to need to be put in place before the end of this financial year to get us started into the next financial year? And the second point, I guess, is my concern about the lack of delivery of recurrent cost improvements, because if we can limp over this line, we still have a massive mountain to climb, don't we, going forward? And just any thoughts, and I appreciate that, Ella may want to comment on that. So thank you.
Shall I come in on the non-recurrent element? Actually, I can comment on both, but I'll do that one first as well. So in those meetings with care groups and with our corporate teams, we set a target of converting 25% of non-recurrent CIP to recurrent, with a deadline for them to come back, I think this next week maybe. We need to get the feedback from that and tally that up, because that should help improve the position. But there's no doubt it's incredibly challenging, and we know from the it talks to the second point really around what's our longer term view on this and on the finances. Our transformation plans that are now system plans are focused on 70% recurrent. So the big workforce transformation programs, the flow, all those things we're doing at system level, which will form, we intend it to be the majority of our SIP plans in future years, are based on assumptions around recurrent savings, but they are going to be incredibly difficult to deliver and require a lot of people's time and energy, but they're essential that we do for the long-term sustainability. And I think linking back to the earlier paper around our strategy, we're really explicit around the need for our strategic priority is to deliver financial balance, and that's going to feed down now into our planning. So for next year's planning, which will start from today really, working with our care groups to say, well, what are those plans to deliver that long-term sustainability? And hopefully that's a core message that is flowing through.
If, with permission, is this part of what you're going to bring back to us in terms of looking at that whole transformation programme?
So the transformation, yep. So on the board development session, we'll be presenting. So you'll get an overview of the key elements of each of the parts of the transformation programme, and I think it'll be a really good opportunity for us as a board to scrutinise and to question just, you know, are they going to deliver the level of recurrent impact we need to see?
Yeah, just also to come back. So absolutely looking at 24-25, as you would expect, it isn't going to get any easier. The allocations are already published, and you remember back in September, the board received the medium-term financial plan submission, and at that point, we didn't have a balanced position for 24-25. So that's an update of that LTO. The medium-term financial plan is going to Finance Performance Committee in January, and we'll come to board as well. So probably for the next meeting in February, there'll be a bit more of an update in terms of what that looks like. But absolutely, that's the work in progress, as you'd expect.
Thank you. Alison.
Yeah, so a couple of comments. So in terms of the workforce sufficiency programme and that piece that I'm SRO for the system on, that has a target of £55 million CIP. Now, we know as part of that work, across CFT and RCHT, we have 60 teams that need help with resourcing. So taking out where we potentially are using higher cost staffing and replacing that with permanent members of staff, or reviewing how we deliver those clinical pathways. So that's working with Tamsin, who's the Chief Operating Officer in CFT. So that work is ongoing and absolutely critical to our H2 finance plan. The other thing to say is in terms of reporting, I report progress on that every 2 weeks through the System Recovery Oversight Group. Now, obviously at the moment, in terms of risk rating is red because of operational pressures that we're facing, but there is a little bit of light at the end of the rainbow here, in terms of I've got assurance that we will be bringing in some additional resources to support that programme of work over the next few weeks, and we'll be moving on to areas such as medical and the work stream there. And I know there's a lot of work that we need to do again on resourcing, but also on job planning, which I think will enable us to firm up on those CIP plans even more. So, you know, this is work that's going on a day-to-day basis that will make a difference. The other point I just generally wanted to make in response to the paper, and the paper doesn't conflate the issue, but I just want to remind everybody, in case there was any confusion, as of July 23, the position was reversed. So there was a period of time where we could use agency to backfill anybody that was striking. And it was a short window where we had that rule in place, but unfortunately it's now been reversed. So as of July 23, we cannot replace anybody who's striking with an agency worker. So I just want to make sure in any of our narrative or papers that we don't conflate that particular issue. And of course, you know, what we do, as we've done throughout all of this junior doctor strike, is that we use either consultants or we use our nurse cohort in terms of covering those junior doctor gaps. Thank you.
It's a helpful pointing out of that matter. Steve?
Two quick things, if it's okay. The first one just follows on from Isabel's question. And I think the productivity trajectory which is being developed, supported by the productivity reports, I think would be helpful to have it at a full board, because I think they would help to give some assurance to a further extent around that, if that's helpful. And I know executive colleagues, teams and committee colleagues are working hard on the developments of that. And we also have a expectation to present that to our integrated care board colleagues as well. So I think that would be a useful component. The other thing, though, I just wanted to check my understanding, is the system's ability to deliver a balanced budget is in part dependent on RCHT delivering a marginal surplus. That's kind of my first, not question. I think that's a statement of the current position. So if there is in the end an industrial impact of a deficit or a financial detriment of somewhere between £1 and £1.5 million, I just wanted to check my understanding that in that eventuality, RCHT could still achieve a balanced outcome, a financial balance. However, that would then put at risk the overall system position, which would then potentially trigger the loss of those opportunities that you've set out in 2.5. So I just wanted to make sure that is a correct reflection of the position.
Yeah, that absolutely is a correct reflection. Subject to further industrial action in February and March and the risk of that, clearly. But yeah, based on the estimates we've got for the strike action that we know about, we would still potentially be able to deliver a small surplus as an organisation. The risk and some of those sections at 2.5, some of those benefits exist at a system level. So things like the write-off of historic debt clearly is a system benefit on the system delivering it. But it's important to make that distinction, and it's also important for the board to be aware of there is a forecast protocol, which I've asked Region about this week on the back of the discussion around industrial action, in terms of if an individual organisation can't deliver break-even, the steps it has to take. So I think your point's really well made in that context, Steve, as well.
Apologies to extend it. I think, and I know we are having conversations with our integrated care system partners, but there is some further urgent work in the scenario that the current declared position continues, i.e. there's no funding for the industrial action aspect. How as a system would we deal with that, rather than it being dealt with by one individual organisation? And I wonder whether we could ask Ian in discussion with system CFOs to progress that, so that we could urgently in each of our respective system organisations have an understanding of that, whilst we continue to do whatever we can to have any influence on some appropriate recognition of the industrial action impact.
I think it's a really good idea, and maybe also, if it isn't there already, request integrated care board discussion about that at the next opportunity, which I think is the 14th of January, if that would be enough time.
Yeah, we're certainly discussing it. So we'll be discussing month 9. We should have the month 9 position by the middle of next week, which would be timely in terms of an update to the ICB board on the 14th then, yeah.
Okay. I'm not going to read out the list there of notings, but you've got it in front of you. I'm not going to read it out in the interest of time because I've got some bad news to share with you, which is that we won't be breaking for lunch at 12:20 unless it really inconveniences anyone. And that is because we are needing to take the People and Culture Committee reports because Alison has to leave us to go to another important meeting at 1 o'clock. So I'm just wondering if anybody would be terribly inconvenienced if we went and took the People and Culture Committee reports before we break for lunch. If anybody has got other commitments, okay, then we'll take them properly, but as speedily as we can. But before that, we'll take the month 8 capital report, please, Ian.
Thank you, Chair, and I will keep this one brief. So the key thing to pull out of this report, so this is the capital report up to the end of month 8. It outlines the year-to-date position, which is slightly behind plan, but mainly on our public dividend capital funding. So that's the funding that we're allocated for specific projects, and that's around the timing of those. So no major concerns to highlight from that in the report. The main aspect of it is that we have had some slippage on schemes. So you can see there's just under 2.8 million of contingency currently in the scheme. The capital approvals group, in the normal way, is working through options to utilise that, and if anything, the risk at this stage that I'd want to share with board is of a small underspend against our capital expenditure limit. We hope to avoid that. We've got a very good track record of, and we've got a lot of great teams across the organisation to help support those things, and we know there's always a requirement for capital. And then the other bit to pull out of the report is the update on the 24-25 position. So we always try and do this. So again, to Isabel's point about looking forward, we always try to have the capital programme approved as early as possible. So that final programme is going to the January FPC and will come to February board. That again has been another incredibly challenging process with just under £50 million of requests against a £19 million capital budget. And so there will be certainly the need for discussion through the relevant committees and board about the prioritisation and the level of risk that we hold with that level of funding, which again links back to the delivering the financial position gives us further access to capital next year, which clearly has benefits for patient care that we would all really want to encourage and to be able to pull off. The only added bit is it's got the request in there for 2 quite small PDC values, so we're asked to approve those following support from the Finance Performance Committee. So happy to pause there, Chair, in the interest of time. Take questions.
Are there, Richard?
Just a very quick comment. The Finance Performance Committee had noted the amount of piecemeal access to PDC, public dividend capital, and so we've asked also for a running total of that to come through in next month's report, so that we keep a track on the revenue implications of that, those loans, which are the appropriate loans to be going for, but they do have a revenue consequence in future years.
Other points to be raised? Okay, in which case we are asked to note the financial position up to the 30th of November and asked then to approve, following support from Finance Performance Committee, the receipt of 0.085 in relation to cyber risk reduction, and also to approve, following support from Finance Performance Committee, the receipt of 0.25 in relation to St Michael's Daycare. So if colleagues could please approve that. And with apologies to Adam for throwing him into that rather unexpectedly before lunch, I would be grateful if we could take the items for which we need Alison with us, which is item 12 and 12.1. I think Alison, we'll see if we can take 12.2 as well for neatness. So Adam, please, if you could give us, oh no, it's not you, it's Isabel.
Thank you, Mary. Yes, I'm stepping into reporting on this as I picked up chairing the meeting in December. So I'll keep this very brief. I think one of the important thing to note is that the PCC the People and Culture Committee are escalating to board their concerns about an overall lack of assurance on the ability to deliver the OD plan. based on the resources required. So I think that is something that hopefully the board will have to consider. But I think in summary of the meeting that was held in December, there are several areas of partial assurance which we are hoping will be progressed in the coming weeks and months. The first of those being a minor one, which I think, Ella, you may have already picked up, around strategy, where we were recommending some additions to the section on supported people. It seemed a little thin in terms of the narrative, and to strengthen really the links around those plans to the safety culture, and again linking back to OD. So that was one area where we could only receive partial assurance on that. The other areas that are in progress, we hope, but are the health and wellbeing plan. There's some significant change planned in the occupational health services and provision, with a move towards health and wellbeing offering. So I think at this stage, because whilst we're waiting for more detail around the completion of the OC Health review and seeing how that then may impact the resources required going forward, and moving the offering towards a more forward-thinking provision around health and wellbeing, we were able to get partial assurance at this stage, but not full assurance. Three other areas very briefly: the annual flu and COVID progress report. Those figures didn't provide us with full assurance, and I'm not quite sure what we do about that to encourage a greater uptake on vaccinations, but clearly wasn't something we could be fully assured about. The second of those areas being the behavioural framework implementation. As you know, the executives have put together a framework around behaviours. What we would like is further assurance around how that's going to be implemented. And then finally, for the first time, the committee received the cultural assurance report. And this was something that we had requested, saying, could we bring together the thinking around the cultural development that we want to see as an organisation. So this was the first report that we received. And we were happy to give some partial assurance to that, but we do feel there's much more that needs to be done in that area, and described back both to committee and then onwards to board. So I won't go through any further detail from the report, which you've already received, but I might just check with Adam. I know that you weren't able to attend, Adam, but whether there's anything that you wish to add before I perhaps go to Alison.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabel. I wonder, Alison, if you would like to come in on any of the matters that Isabel has raised. I have a couple of questions, but you'd have the chance to respond.
So with regards to the resources for our OD implementation of the OD plan, we do now have 2 members of staff that we've recruited, but of course, as we appreciate, we're an extra large trust, so 2 members of staff with the leadership obviously within pod doesn't stretch that far. So we've been working through what the priorities are. We'd like to do more hand in hand with the care groups, but obviously appreciate at the moment everybody is under operational pressures. So, you know, it's not a normal situation where I'd be able to talk to Robin around who could we free up at the moment. So, but we're working through a plan on what we can deliver and prioritising it through the Transformation Oversight Group.
Thank you, Alison. My point builds on that, really. Notwithstanding the conversation we've just had about money, I do wonder whether we need to ask you and the other execs to consider whether we should bring in external resource to get this programme delivered, or, you know, to assist with that, because I fully appreciate what's being said, and yet what I know from my day job is the more busy we are, often the more we do need the support of leadership and other development, and I don't know whether that would be worth considering.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We'll take that away for further discussion with colleagues.
Thank you. I also wanted to comment on the staff survey going up. Well done. That seems really, it doesn't seem like a very big increase, but it's going in the right direction, isn't it? And we've already covered the point about the ethnic groups of staff. Are there other questions? Yeah, Alison.
Yeah, just to say on the staff survey, of course, we don't get the full national results until March. However, we do know, sort of looking at our comparators that use the same survey methodology as we use, because there's a couple of providers of the national staff survey. So there are 64 other trusts, and we do seem to have landed in a take-up rate that is comparable to, which is good, at 48%. We can also see when we look at those comparator trusts, but that's only 64 out of the whole of England, we do seem to have done a lot better this year than compared to last year in those people promise elements. But obviously, until we get the full national results, we won't be able to say exactly where we have landed nationally.
Thank you. Okay, so we're asked to note the committee chair's report, and if we could do that, we'll move on to 12.1, which we may just need to take a tiny bit longer on, but I just would like to note, perhaps before you speak, Alison, that this template is a national template that we are bound by, but as was requested at the committee, I really appreciate the summary report that's been added. I have a couple of questions about the report, but I do appreciate that being done. So if I could ask you to introduce this equality delivery standard, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So as you've already said, EDS2 is a national system working to national deadlines, hence the reason why it's come to Trust Board today, even though there is work still to be finished off, but because we have to publish in February, that's why it's at Trust Board today. EDS has been the Equality Delivery System, that's another acronym I appreciate, in place since 2011. It was suspended during COVID, and last year it was the first time that it was reinstated. There wasn't a lot of time for us to do much work last year, so we're kind of on a journey. And although when you look at the results, you can feel a little bit disappointed, actually, where we are now, if we were to remark it again, we know we would be in a much better position. So I'm expecting next year's publication to be much stronger, because we're currently at the top end of developing, and I'd hope us to move some of those indicators into the achieving. As I say, take the paper as read. You can see we've produced a shortened version, which we hope is easier to read, that's outside of the national requirements. We're asking our regional NHS England colleagues whether that would be okay to publish. They may say yes, however they may say no, in which case then we're obliged to publish the full report. However, what I would say is our Southwest colleagues have been pleased with the progress that we are making. We've got a long way to go, particularly in addressing all inequalities, but we are making progress, is how I'd like to summarise it. Thank you.
It's really helpful, Alison, thank you. I have a couple of points to raise now. Other people want to raise? So, Alison, I think I probably may have sent you my detailed comments on the report, so I won't go into them now, but I guess there were two pieces that I did want to just pick up. One is there's mention of there being an EDI conference in February 24. Will that be involving the board, and if so, should we have notice of it? And the other thing to raise is the point that was made somewhere in the report about whether or not we should have a formal EDI committee. And I think that is worth a bit of consideration. But just those 2 points for now, otherwise I'll send you my detailed comments.
Thank you. So with regards to the conference, yes, we've been planning a conference. As I say, we recruited into the EDI team this year. That is a joint conference for February. I have to say, at the moment, we're currently considering whether or not we should move the date because of the operational pressures. So we'll come back to the board to firm up the date, and of course would love Trust Board to be involved in that conference. But as I say, we're currently reviewing the date at the moment. The Equalities Committee is something that we absolutely must get up and running. And so there is work in progress on that as we speak. What we have been doing is formalising which exec director across, with my dual hat on, across both trusts is going to be the exec sponsor for each of the staff networks. We've also put money in to supporting the chairs of those networks, and exec colleagues have also taken on board equality objectives this year, which presently have in draft, so we'll share with the board very soon some common draft objectives for non-exec directors as well. So that's the work that we're currently doing, which will help us again with our completion of our EDS2 for next year, as well as obviously being the right thing to do anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody got any comments on this report? Ian.
Yeah, thank you. Just on the EDS action plan that's in the paper, there's quite a few of the ones that don't have a completion date in them, or completion dates in the past. So it was just understanding as if that, and again probably kind of who is responsible for those actions as well, just so that we've got the ability to track those going forward.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Ian. We need to just smarten up the action plan a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you. So as I say, Alison, I have got some specific comments, the detail that I'll send to you. Otherwise, I wonder if we could perhaps approve the Equality Delivery Standard. I'm trying to think of how to say this, pending some other corrections such as the one that Ian has just mentioned around getting, as you said, smartening the plan a bit. And there are some other points that could be, I don't know how to say that really, but that's, I think that's what we're asking to do, subject to some future refinement prior to it being published. And we note, Alison, that if the region doesn't support us publishing the summary, we will be publishing the report as it stands. So colleagues, if we could please approve that. And then I am going to propose, because I can feel it in the room, that we do stop for lunch and we take the board diversity plan after lunch, if that's okay with everybody. Ian has kindly offered to do the charitable funds report in Alison's absence, so I think we're okay on that one. So it is 22, I think it is, some clocks all say something different. Yeah, 22. Could we be back for 1:10? Would that be acceptable? Lovely, thank you all very much. See you later. To get lunch and wasn't too inconvenienced by our slight delay in having lunch, but I was grateful for that. So we are still now on item 12.2, which is the board diversity plan, and I'm going to ask our company secretary to introduce the item. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. So the Trust Board back in September of this year reviewed and approved the closure excuse me, of the 22-23 board diversity plan, and in doing so closed all of the actions apart from one, which related to our next director programme recruitment, and that's been moved obviously into our 23-24 plan. The People and Culture Committee received an assurance report on the progress against the plan back in December, and this is presented to the board on a biannual basis. We're a little early coming because we were actually a little late coming to the board earlier this year. So therefore, we have been making some good progress, but obviously there are remaining actions in place. It's of note that we are in the process of a next director recruitment programme. We have interviews scheduled in the next 2 weeks, which is quite exciting. The board are asked to note the progress against the actions, noting that the board actually are scheduled to receive equality, diversity and inclusion training via its board development plan in February. If it's possible, I'd like to suggest that given we at the board today, we've had conversations with regards to ED&I objectives for board directors, I'd like to propose that we acknowledge this and update the board action, the action plan, so this is incorporated. It's also of note that there was a sentence in the report where it ended as the trust, and it should have just been a full stop before that. So my apologies for that typographical error. So thank you, Chair. Any comments?
Thanks very much, Lindsay, and also thank you for overseeing what is a really important piece of work. Do colleagues have questions or comments about our board diversity plan? Ian?
One, Chair, if I may, for my clarity and background understanding, where we talk about the 10% commitment by 2025, when in 2025 is that referring to?
So it'll be the beginning of the financial year in April 2025.
Okay, so 2025. Brilliant, thank you.
And yes, just to endorse what Lindsay said, we are interviewing for substantive board members and also for next director in the next couple of weeks. And certainly not for want of trying to get somebody on the next director programme, which is a programme designed to enable underrepresented groups or people of different ethnicities to access board level experience prior to them perhaps joining another board as a substantive member. So we are excited to be running some interviews this time.
I wondered if that that ought to be a KPI on our IPR, given it is such a specific target that we've committed to as a board. And we've obviously got an opportunity ahead of April to refresh that and put it in.
Yeah, we could do that. That sounds like a
Good idea.
Thank you. I'll take that away.
Thank you. Other thoughts or comments? No? Okay, in which case we are asked to receive and note the biannual update of progress against the diversity plan. Thank you. Bringing us, Sarah, to item 13, the Remuneration Appointments Committee Assurance Report.
Thank you, Chair. Look, in the interest of time, I mean, it is all there. I mean, we've just considered and made a number of appointments. So unless anybody's got any particular questions, which I'm very happy to answer.
Is there anything you wanted to add, having chaired the last?
No, I think the report's self-explanatory. Thank you.
Okay, I think it is self-explanatory. Nobody appears to have any pressing questions, so please could we note the items considered by that committee in its November and December meetings and the decisions taken on behalf of the board as per our terms of reference. Which then brings us to the Charitable Fund Committee Assurance Report, and I just would like to note that we are considering this item in our capacity as corporate trustee of the charitable funds as opposed to board here. So again, over to you, Sarah, please.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. It's a shame about the timing of this particular report when the next Charitable Funds Committee meets, which is later this month. You'll see from the assurance report we undertook, some very careful considerations, and we do have some concerns, which I know that the professional teams are working on very hard and very diligently, and we are due some substantial updates in our meeting this month. So I'm sure at the next board meeting I'll be able to give more detailed assurance. But just to summarise the challenges that we face, as people will be aware from their own personal lives, you know, people really don't have as much money as perhaps they did in the past, and so there's a lot more competition for donations, and so our donations to our general fund are not as strong as they have been. We also have a separate problem where in the past where people have given us considerable funds for specific activities often related to care they've received in the hospital, so it could be in the renal unit or in cardiology. They will designate funds to be spent in those particular areas, and our colleagues sometimes, because they're under so many operational pressures, struggle to find the time to develop plans and proposals to spend the money. So while we're having a reduction of donations into some funds, we're sitting on very considerable amounts of money which we're struggling to spend. There's a lot of work going on to rectify both situations. We do have a strategy for the charity, as the board has seen and has approved, and we monitor the implementation of the action plans related to the strategy. But as the report highlights, there's quite a lot of partial assurance there, because there is a lot of work in hand to further understand and put in mitigations so that we can offer more assurance come the next meeting. But I'm very happy to answer questions that anybody's got, because I appreciate it's, if you're not involved in the Charitable Funds Committee, it could look a bit worrying.
Thank you, Sarah. I think you've frozen, but I hope you can still hear us. I'm really glad you raised the point about the partial assurances, because it didn't read as well as it might had you had the subsequent meeting. And I think we could probably wait for that and wait for our next committee. But I know Ian is here and happy to assist us. So one of my points about that report of Sarah's was that was to be an update on the Mermaid Centre development. Are you able to do an update on that, Ian?
Not in any great detail, I'm afraid, Chair. No, I know that discussions are still ongoing involving strategic estates and the project lead for it. But no, aside from that, apologies, I'm not.
Do others have any questions? I think Sarah has frozen, but so what's the date of the next Charitable Funds Committee?
Next Thursday.
Sorry,
okay.
Jack. So sorry, I got booted out of the Teams. It's an intermittent problem I've been having all day. So it was the perfect time to be booted out of the meeting, where I'm there to answer questions. So I'm not sure if any arose while I was out of the meeting. And I know Ian's here, who's lead executive, as Alison's not with us today.
Well, welcome back, Sarah. We had just picked up that people didn't have further questions, and I was just commenting that that you were right to say that it did look concerning if you hadn't actually been at the meeting, but that the board can receive the update from the meeting that's next week and gain assurance probably from that. Unless you have any update on the Mermaid Centre development, because Ian wasn't able to help us with that.
I haven't been updated on that.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. So I don't think, Isabel, you're to hand, yes.
Yeah, it was only just a question, really. Thank you, Sarah, for the report, and appreciate the timing is not ideal, but I just wondered if there's anything that as a board we should be thinking about in terms of the offer of support to the appeal director, because it's such a critical area for us, isn't it, in relation to the new hospital, etc.
Yes.
Is there anything else that we could be doing?
I think that you raised an extremely good point, and I know a number of board members have already offered to support her and have met with her, and she very much appreciates that. And Alison is her line manager, but I know Alison also appreciates all of our efforts with introductions to people in the community, all sorts of things that are going on, including from yourself. So thank you very much for that. And as when we receive our next report and there's more information about timings of the launch of the appeal and how groups are going to be mobilised in support of the appeal, I think there will be other opportunities which I can update everybody with.
Thanks, Isabel. Anybody else? Okay, in which case we are asked to note the report from the November committee and the extraordinary committee in December and the decisions taken. on behalf of the corporate trustees. If we could note that, please. And perhaps also note that we will look forward to receiving more assurance after the next meeting. Bringing us to 14.1. Sarah, I think it's Ian who's going to help us out with this one, which is the annual report and accounts. Ian.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I'll take the various papers in this as kind of one and cover across them. So I'm delighted to be able to present this item. It's a really exciting item to present, particularly the annual report, not so much the accounts, although as the accountant around the table, I probably shouldn't say that openly. So this is the set of, so this is the accounts for the charity for 22-23. So at 14.12, you've got the actual set of accounts. Probably a more accessible document for colleagues and for the public is the annual report. And I think I would just want to emphasise that this report is essentially our ability to showcase the great work that the charity's done over the last 12 months. So it wouldn't be right for me not to mention some of the financial figures. So the income for the year for the charity was 747,000, which was up just over 2% on the previous year. So that's a really positive position to be in. Expenditure for the year was 830,000. And this is the one time when I'm glad we spend more than we get in sometimes. Because as Sarah just alluded to, we do have significant charitable fund reserves, as you see in the report. And so it's really good that we've seen those efforts to increase awareness of what charitable funding can do for the organisation and for patients and staff, because it's you see in the report it's used for a variety of causes. The net assets for the charity are just under 2.5 million, which is down from 2.67 million the previous year. So again, reflecting the fact that we've used some of those reserves, which is not an unhelpful thing. The key bit of the report is the section 13, which is the impact of the schemes that we have. So within the 14.1.3 on page 527 of the pack, it starts with a few pictures and some updates on the scheme. So there's some really important ones in there. The first one is the renal unit. I had the benefit of going to the renal unit just before Christmas and seeing some of these things in real life, and how that supports patients that are moving to home dialysis on that pathway, but while still being in the hospital environment to support them with that transition is a fantastic one. And then equally, you've got the switchable privacy glass within the new Lowen oncology ward in our new build, which was funded by charitable funds to kind of help with some of those isolation issues that our oncology patients suffer from. And there are a couple of the big ones, but also, we heard earlier from the beneficiary story, some of those little things, the booklets, the Heart of Headland Boxes of Kindness that's recently been launched. It's just a really good opportunity to showcase some of the work of the charity. So that's what the report is there to do. Two things happen with these documents. So we have to file the annual accounts with the Charities Commission by the end of the month. So they're here for approval, having been supported through Charitable Funds Committee at the extraordinary meeting we had prior to Christmas. They've been audited. The audit opinion letter is in there. So they were given a full unqualified opinion from the auditors. There were 2 low recommendations flagged by the auditors, which is not unhelpful, and there's been management actions and responses against each of those, which were discussed in detail at the committee. And then the annual report is a document that we will then publish to showcase, as I've said, the great work that the charity does. The final bits in it are we've already touched on it to some extent with Sarah's update, the strategy, being the updated strategy being agreed, consistent with the trust strategy in terms of alignment of values and ambition. And then finally, obviously, the work in terms of the appeal and where that's at, as we've just discussed. So I'm happy to open it up for any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ian, and it's a pleasure to hear you presenting the report. Thank you. I thought the pictures were lovely. It really does it brings it to life, doesn't it? And I think that's incredibly helpful, and helpful with the general fundraising too, to let people really see what's happening. And so I thought it was a very, very good read. Colleagues, are there questions? Ella?
I have two. One's more of a comment. So around that point around how we, I think you're right, bringing it to life and showing pictures really helps, doesn't it? So could we share more widely with our staff in general? Can we do, send out an email comms or something, the highlights of what the funds have been accessed for this year? And then my other point was going to be around for the new build, the Women's and Children's Hospital and our new hospital. How is that programme interacting? It might be one for you and I to take offline, Ian, with the charity, because if there are things we should be considering now, because planning for them and putting them in the build now would be cheaper than doing it as a retrofit, we ought to be thinking ahead. So if there are things that are above and beyond or would meet the criteria of charitable funding, such as that privacy glass, or the wonderful things we've seen on the renal unit, we ought to be thinking proactively now.
Yeah, I'd absolutely support that. And the Women's and Children's Care Group are very good with their charitable funds. They've got, we do receive substantial donations for neonatal and maternity care, as you would expect. So yeah, absolutely, that's something that we need to make sure is in people's thinking. It should be in the way that we've done it, as you've seen in lower MRI oncology unit. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Is there somebody from charitable funds involved with the group that is leading the
I've
build?
just taken over the exec responsibility for that for an interim period. So I will ask the question at the programme team meeting and then perhaps link in with you, Ian, to make sure the two are joining up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Richard?
Just wondered if there's the opportunity to run a one-page infographic of where the money went, the impact it's had, that we could laminate, distribute around the hospital, etc., just as a one-off where your donations went.
Great idea.
Yeah, sounds like a very good suggestion. Happy to take that back.
Oh, I do like you having to wave at me, Adam. Go ahead.
I'll ask a finance question, Ian. On the annual report, I'm absolutely recognising the great work the charity does. I'm just asking for a bit more information, please, on the investment policy, which is on pages 521 and 522 of our pack. It makes reference to the fact that we've had the same investment manager since 2011. I'm just wondering how often we keep that under review, please.
Yep. So there's an annual review done by the Charitable Funds Committee. Sarah will be able to confirm that was done this year. And we do receive a report from Barclays in terms of their investment management portfolio, which includes performance against other fund, the kind of average of funds that exist. And yeah, it's discussed and agreed to continue with them this year, but it's every year.
I seem to remember a great discussion about ethical funding as well that has taken place repeatedly as it goes. Sarah?
Yes, thank you very much. And I can confirm that, Adam. We do invite Barclays in and we do benchmark their performance against other comparable organisations, and we do keep the investment policy under review. We made changes to the policy this year, aligned to our values of not investing in particular funds. So I just wanted to also answer the question about our appeal director's involvement with the Women and Children's development. She is involved, so she has a committee where she has operational leads, so that there is a good join up there. And as the project itself is evolving, there's a huge amount of feedback from staff being fed into how that facility that we're fundraising for can really enhance the experience for patients and their families. So there's a really important clinical lead and join up, and hopefully Alistair and Kim will be able to verify what I'm saying as well from a clinical point of view. I just wanted to put on record, my huge contribution on behalf of the committee for the very small fundraising team that we've got and the incredible impact that they have in enabling members of staff and our community who support us so well with a quite extraordinary personal effort in their fundraising, how much they're able to achieve within a very difficult environment. And you'll see that in the report, some of the impact we have and the work that we're doing to capture more stories about more of the impact that we have, so we can share that. But I really do want to put on record our thanks to them.
Thank you, Sarah. Absolutely endorse that. Colleagues, are there? Steve?
Yeah, I'd like to echo the thanks that Sarah's just shared. I think they do an extraordinary job. And some of the examples that are provided in the annual report, I think, are really, really powerful. I'd also like to say thank you, Sarah, to you and your role, and to the committee in their role in enabling this kind of development. So I think both are thanks to the fundraising champions that we have, but also thank you to colleagues in the leadership roles that you play. They make such an impact. And if we think of the example of the renal home dialysis service, the transformation that brings, not just in respect of the experience in hospital, but the life transforming impact that can have going forward is incredible. And all of the examples in the paper, I think, were really powerful. And there's a couple of comments that have already been made from Sarah, from Richard, from Ella, about how we can communicate these examples more broadly. And I think that would directly address the question you raised at the start, Sarah, about how we help support colleagues operationally who might be challenged for time when they see the impact that sort of fundraising can have. I think it's incredibly powerful. So thank you. And also thank you to everybody, of course, who has donated. All of those colleagues, patients, families, members of the public who've given their commitments and made those donations. It makes such an impact.
Thanks, Steve. That's a really important point about the impact, because it really does make a difference to patients and staff. Often people sort of labouring away, not necessarily seen by others, and so real difference. So colleagues, if there are no further questions or comments, we are, in our capacity as corporate trustee, we're asked to authorise Sarah, as chair of the Chapel Funds Committee, to sign the letter of representation as required by the auditors, to approve the RCHT charity annual accounts for 22-23, and to approve the RCHT charity annual report for 22-23, and to do a little further work on how we communicate this and how we bring it to people's attention. Lovely, thank you very much. So we come to item 16, and any additional risks or changes to existing risks are in relation to the board assurance framework. Lindsay.
Thank you, Chair. We've talked about a number of different risks. I think probably similar risks that we talked about at our last public meeting around our operational performance and the impacts on the quality of care and the financial impacts as well. They are included within our board assurance framework. We talked about the impacts and the risks associated with the industrial action. So that's the costs and again, the impacts on patient experience and care. And we also identified the risk around the system financial risk. Again, they've reflected on our BAF. We also touched on quite a few times the impacts of the agency spend and the associated level of risk, but which is managed through our relevant meetings, and again is reflected on our board assurance framework. Happy for other colleagues to pick anything else I've missed. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Colleagues, has anything been missed? No? Okay, thank you for that. And it brings us to item 16, questions from members of the public. And I'm pleased to say there are a few questions or comments today. So, Lindsay.
Thank you, Chair. We've had 4 comments and or questions. I'll read them through and I'll invite colleagues to provide comment if that's okay. So the first question is from Anonymous. They say, so much positivity over a 50% increase in complaints. Surely this indicates you are not learning from previous ones. Responding on time may tick performance boxes, but it's not the most important thing here. That's the comment provided by Anonymous, and I'm going to ask him to comment. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for your comment. Our positivity wasn't just about the compliance or the increase, 50% increase. What I would say is that overall 20%, there's been a 20% decrease overall, but an increase in 6 areas. And I have put a comprehensive response in the comment box that outlines what they are. In the main, these reflect the operational pressure and are in the main all related to elective or non-elective care being provided in a timely manner. And we know the associated challenges that we've spoken about today at board. The positivity in the report was related to the 12-month sustained improved performance of our urgent and emergency care services, who had been really struggling with being able to get their complaints out in time. So, and some of the positivity shared around today was, in fact, as regards receiving complaints, being able to deal with them, but absolutely fully acknowledging that we'd like to head more into the informal arena, more timely, face-to-face as opposed to formal. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, Kim. The next question is also from Anonymous. They say, is there some learning from social prescribing and the networks in the local area? I'll go to Kim if that's okay.
Again, I've taken the liberty of thinking that we had a large discussion as regards our globally educated, and that's what this is in reference to. So absolutely some lessons to learn, and we're working with our partner agencies as well across the system to be able to do that joined up community approach. And we touched briefly on it, and we're looking wider than just our own organisation or jointly with CFT. So we've already picked up that our church networks and our religious networks are very important, and we're expanding those. We're starting things such as book clubs, cultural evenings, but we absolutely are firmly committed to work wider than just internally.
Thank you, Kim. The third question from Anonymous is, other trusts over-recruit during graduation periods when they have good candidates. Could the trust look to do this? This is so that they have greater resilience and are prepared to meet the expected staff turnover in the next few months. I'll ask Alison, our Dual Chief People Officer, to respond. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So over-recruiting to allow for turnover is a good idea, because we'll always expect some turnover. However, we'd like that turnover to be positive, i.e. somebody moving perhaps with a partner somewhere else rather than leaving for the wrong reasons. And we do focus a lot now on retention. So we do over-recruit on areas such as healthcare assistants, who may be then going on to pursue degree apprenticeships or other career pathways in our nursing career pathway. We are presently thinking about having a local graduate scheme, but that paper will be working its way through both trusts in terms of the governance structures in place. So that's something else that we're thinking about at the moment. Thank you.
I think Kim's got a quick follow-up as well on that. Thank you, Kim.
Yeah, so we always take into account the possibility, as Alison has said. And a recent example is we recently over-recruited to midwives in our midwifery department, absolutely acknowledging the calibre of the candidates, our continued requirement, and that also enabled us to cover maternity leave as well in a far more sustainable approach. So something we always take into consideration.
Thank you. Our last question, also from Anonymous, says, regarding vaccination uptake, is there a way that if a member of staff has their vaccination at a local GP clinic, could it be automatically linked to trust uptake data through occupational health or similar? I'll ask Alison to comment on that. Thank you.
Well, I'd absolutely love, given that the NHS has got 15 million staff, for that data to be automatically uplinked from GP surgeries through to our individual occupational health systems. The NHS as a whole uses only probably a couple of providers for occupational health systems, but that work has not yet been done, but maybe in the future. In the meantime, for next year, the work that we have been doing in RCHT stands us in good stead, because we've been doing a HR systems program, which has been data cleansing, and we're a good way through that program now. what we will then be doing is ensuring that every member of staff has what's called one-to-one positioning. And that's important because then if next year you say, I've had my vaccine, my flu or my COVID vaccine at my local surgery, then you'd be able to tell us that and we'd be able to make that available on your record. So that's, you know, I'm sure Kelvin is like cringing at the thought of having to do a manual upload, but I think that's the intimate step until we reach a point that we can automatically link all our data systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That's the last of the questions.
Thank you very much for your questions, comments, and also for the responses. It really does make a difference to us that members of the public, which include a lot of staff, I know, are involved in this meeting, and that we hear your comments. A few years ago, I can't remember how long now, Lindsay, we did a bit of a survey, didn't we, of members of the public as to offering comments on our meeting and how we might improve it. And perhaps we should repeat that, especially as we've got a much bigger audience now.
We do have that as an action on our action log. So yeah, so we're absolutely doing that. So thank you.
That's good. Thank you very much. So I'm going to give Ian notice, as the sort of person who's most recently joined the board in this capacity, that I'll come to you for a comment towards the end. But we're now on item 17, thinking about our meeting. How have we done? What went well? What would have been better if? Have we contributed to patient safety? Are we consistent with our etiquette? Have we considered health inequalities? And are there matters to communicate? So that broad range, but I will ask Ian, when everybody else has commented, to give a fresh eyes view of how it's gone this morning. So there were a lot of papers, weren't there? Isabel.
Somebody has to start, don't they? I mean, I think it's been a very good meeting. I think the papers have been excellent. I think the good thing for me is that we haven't had to go through the papers in great detail because we do have a responsibility as board members to have read the papers before the meeting, and it was pretty evident that we've all read our papers. So I think the questions that we then posed were pertinent. So from my perspective, it was good. I think we've spent some time today actually thinking about inequalities, which I think is really important, and I hope that we'll continue to do that. I think Ian must be delighted to have joined us because you now know what each of our meetings is going to be like. So, but no, I thank you very much, and thank you for chairing, Mary, as ever.
Isabel, thank you. Richard.
I think I echo Isabel's comments. I think one of the themes that's come out that would be helpful for us to explore at some point is there are a few papers, and it's often those that are externally prescribed, how they are presented and what they need to contain. As I'm thinking perhaps of the EDI paper in there, which is, I think, between the summary and the paper, it covers about 100 pages. And I do wonder how well they communicate what we do out to the general public and who would read all of those pages to get an understanding of where we are. And so I think there is something around how we take some of the things that are necessary for us to do and then package them in ways that are really meaningful for particularly the public, but also for our staff and for ourselves, that really pull out some of the themes that come out sometimes from multiple papers. So there are a number of papers where there is a commentary about what we're trying to achieve and how well we're achieving it that comes from those multiple sources. So I think it was a very good meeting. We've got through a lot of work. Perhaps there's still a bit of consideration about how we articulate what we're doing as well to the public.
Really good point, Richard, thank you. And it goes together with that point we were thinking about earlier about how we communicate what we do and how we get much better at involving members of the public and staff in what we do. So, Alistair, was that a hand or was it? No. Alison.
Yes, sort of thinking back to Jill's report, which mentioned Gosport, and of course Jill agreed to sort of clarify what that findings of that report was, but the situation there was, you know, over 400 patients died because of incorrect drug prescribing, and it just made me think, we do quite a lot of inquiries or a lot of reports, and over time we then refer it to, you know, the Francis report or whatever it is, and perhaps there should be something that always makes us clarify, you know, what was the findings, what actually happened, and why are we making reference to that, and actually go back to, you know, what went wrong, very succinctly always.
Be helpful, Alison, because it's also a generational thing. I remember within social care we always referred to child death inquiries by the name of the investigator, and you had to belong to a certain generation to remember what it was all about, or even to know. So I think that's a really well made point. Thank you for that. The waving Adam.
Try not to say what's been said already. I hope it's clear to people watching in that we're clearly facing significant challenges now today as a trust, and we spent a lot of time, quite rightly, talking about those issues in this meeting, but we were also able to focus on the future as well, which felt like a real positive and a real strength. So we were talking about what we're looking to achieve in 24, 25. We were talking about the medium term. We were even talking about the 10-year strategy and challenging ourselves around that, which felt like a real positive anyway, but a real positive in the context of we've got incredibly difficult challenges we're dealing with today.
Yes, I agree, and that was something a few meetings ago, perhaps a year ago, we were really saying we've got to do better. So it's good to feel we are doing better in that regard. Rob, did you put your hand up and down, or did I miss it?
The point was covered.
Great, thank you. So, Ian, what do you think of us then? Speak very carefully.
Well, I think you've set the bar quite high. Yeah, so I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've been to these meetings before as deputy, but it's nice to sit here as the incoming interim CFO as part of a journey for the next 12 months with everybody. I think things that work well, I love the patient story at the beginning. We have that in charitable funds, and we always reflect that that's one of the best parts of the meeting. I think the depth of understanding and knowledge around the room was really useful for me to understand, and reassuring that that all aspects are understood to an equal extent, which I think is really positive. In terms of things, I think we covered health inequalities well today as well, and obviously linking to the patient story with that one. In terms of things, I think for us to reflect on and do better, I agree with Richard's point about succinctness of reports. I always think there's work we can do in committees and as exec leads on that. Medical acronyms, as a non-medical, non-nurse, non-clinical person, I do struggle sometimes in terms of what some of those mean, and I know that point was raised. Referencing page numbers might be helpful. So when I look through the pack, sometimes when people know their report well and speak to a specific section, it can be quite difficult to get to that section to then be listening for the in-depth for the discussion that's taking place. So I think a habit perhaps of referencing particularly page numbers if it's something particular that we're teasing out from a report. And then the only other bit that I think we perhaps didn't reflect on in totality, but there were a number of occasions, whether it be the learning from death report or other reports, where we talked about digital and the lack of an ability to capture information, or not following our processes in quite the way we'd hope to. And I think how we bring some of that together with eCare on the horizon in terms of our replacement electronic patient record system, to understand what does that mean in terms of controlled drugs, in terms of learning from deaths, in terms of other aspects, so that we maximise the benefits from that, because it's a fundamental change programme for the organisation. So it felt like a bit of a thread through a number of items today that I touched on. So yeah, really positive. Really enjoyed the meeting, so thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. That was a really, really good summary. Covered a lot of points, so thank you. Thank you for that. So unless there are any other comments, I think we should draw that section to a close. The date of our next meeting in public is the 7th of March 2024, and we will move on after probably a very short break, if I can gain people's agreement to that, to our board meeting in private. But at this stage, we will leave behind and thank members of the public and staff who may have been with us. Thank you very much for attending.